Chapter 105. Qingyan's Henjun. Meng Qi's footsteps paused, and her expression became serious. When Yin Qingyan was in his true form, his eyes were blue. When the white-robed man was in his true form, his eyes were no different from ordinary people's. They were dark brown, but deeper and brighter. At this time, his eyes were strangely red, as if they were dyed red with blood. They looked particularly strange. Yin Qingyan looked at Meng Qi with such a pair of eyes. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were colder than his expression. It was as if he had no human feelings, leaving only emptiness and sharpness. Qingyan's Henjun. Meng Qi's mind instantly flashed with countless books she had read. She took 2 steps forward, and her breathing suddenly stopped. A huge resistance came from the front, making it difficult for her to even take a step forward. Meng Qi looked up and looked around in surprise. The room was silent, and a light veil hung from the roof and fell quietly to the ground. What was it? She stared ahead. What was this thing that made it difficult for her to breathe? Meng Qi held his breath and condensed his qi. He slowly took another step forward. Her fingertips on her hands hanging by her sides flashed slightly. Her right hand gently brushed the storage bag, and a silver medicine knife was already in her hand. Yin Qingyan's gaze finally changed a little. His eyes moved slightly, and he looked at Meng Qi's hand hanging by her side and the silver medicine knife. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, but that smile was more like a condescending expert mocking Meng Qi for overestimating herself. Ugh! Meng Qi frowned slightly. When she took that step, she felt as if she had stepped into a huge whirlpool. She couldn't see anything around her, but her body was desperately being torn in all directions. In addition, there was a huge pressure desperately squeezing her, and the force was so strong that it seemed to crush her. Ting! Meng Qi opened her mouth and only said one word. She felt that she had said the rest of the words, but she didn't even hear herself. She opened her mouth again, but no matter what she said, her voice seemed to be swallowed. Meng Qi's expression froze. Could this be? Yin Qingyan's left hand was still pointing to the sky while her right hand was pointing to the ground. The veil beside the bed didn't move at all, but his sleeves were slowly moving. Was it the 5 spirits Yuan Qi? Meng Qi immediately realized that it was the 5 spirits origin Qi in the Starfall Sea. Was Yin Qingyan using the 5 spirits Yuan Qi in the Starfall Sea to heal herself? She stared at the white-robed man in a daze. His clothes seemed to be slowly moved by something tangible. Meng Qi suddenly remembered that when she first picked up the injured little white tiger, she didn't sense the existence of a spirit ocean in its body. Where the spirit ocean should have been, there was only a pitch-black void. The pitch-black void seemed to be able to swallow everything. There was no spiritual energy or inner core. Meng Qi had once treated Su Junmo's injuries. She had seen the spirit sea of the Yao cultivators. In fact, it was not much different from that of the cultivators in the Trichiliocosm. The inner cores of Yao cultivators were slightly different from the inner cores of cultivators, but their spirit seas were not much different. At that time, she didn't think that little white tiger's spirit sea was completely damaged. She thought that it was a young sky demon white tiger. Even if it was a royal, its spirit sea might not have formed yet. In addition, little white tiger was so seriously injured. There was even a barrier injury in its body. Meng Qi now recalled everything that happened that day. Could it be that Yin Qingyan was like Yi Wu, seriously injured to the point that his spirit sea was completely destroyed? But he appeared occasionally and was clearly so powerful. Meng Qi's mind was a little chaotic. For a moment, all kinds of thoughts came one after another. She looked up at the white-robed man in front of her. The other party's eyes were even redder. Yin Qingyan was very good-looking. Even among the countless beauties in the 3 realms, he was definitely the most outstanding one. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a peerless beauty. At this moment, his eyes were blood-red and his gaze was cold. He looked strange. Compared to the usual calm white-robed man, he was more mysterious and evil. He actually looked even more attractive. Meng Qi only looked at him for a moment. She felt a little nervous, and her heart also started to beat faster. It was as if those blood-red eyes could really suck away a person's soul. Meng Qi hurriedly turned her head away. She didn't dare to continue staring at Yin Qingyan. She calmed down a little. It seemed that the other party was fine, and was just using the 5-spirit essence energy to heal his injuries. Meng-Chi heaved a sigh of relief and slowly took 2 steps back. She was still holding the medicine knife and looking at the door. At this moment, there was still the demon world battle concubine Yi Wu on the great desolate island. Yin Qingyan should have reached a more critical moment. It was always right to be careful. Meng-Chi thought for a moment, and simply walked to the door. She held the medicine knife and directly carved a Dharma array on the door. She casually took out a few spirit stones and inserted them into the array. Then she turned around and sat back on the chair. She stared at Yin Qingyan for a while. Even though the blood red in his eyes seemed to be thicker, he still looked calm. Meng-Chi kept a few more ling stones in her hand in case she needed them. At this time, she definitely couldn't disturb Yin Qingyan. She even regretted her rashness just now. Meng-Chi simply took out the bamboo slip that recorded the forging method of the 5-spirit cauldron, and surrounded the bamboo slip with ling energy. A moment later, a white light flashed in her hand, and the bamboo slip disappeared. Xiuzhe usually called the initial forging of a soul-tethered talisman the foundation of a talisman. At this time, there was no need for treasures. In the spiritual sea, the Xiuzhe used their spiritual sense and familiar control of ling energy to carve out the initial shape of a talisman. Some Xiuzhe who were called geniuses were born with stronger control of ling energy. Even if they used the same spells, their cultivation speed would be faster than other people's. Moreover, many genius Xiuzhe who were in the late stage of Zhuji would have extra strength to start forging their own soul-tethered talisman. For example, Pei Mufeng, Qin Xioma, and Xue Qingxian of the Xue family. The soul-tethered talisman could be connected to the Xiuzhe's heart. In the end, the Xiuzhe could even cultivate a spiritual sense to live in it. That was the spirit that people often talked about. Pei Mufeng was able to cultivate a sword spirit when he was in the Yuanying stage. He was extremely talented. The people of Falling Star Pavilion were willing to worship him as the pavilion master, not because he was invincible in the sect now, but because the elders had high hopes for him and hoped that he could lead Falling Star Pavilion to the peak. Meng-Chi didn't know if Xue Qingxian had also cultivated a spirit for his soul-tethered talisman. At least Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xioma shouldn't have it now. However, this was something that she would have to consider in the future. Meng-Chi's spiritual sense probed into her spiritual sea. The pure white inner core floated above the spiritual sea. Wisps of spiritual aura wrapped around the inner core, which looked lively and lively. Next to the inner core was the scroll that Lin Yin gave her. It was also wrapped in wisps of spiritual aura, which complemented the inner core. At this time, there was another bamboo slip above Meng-Chi's spiritual sea. The bamboo slip was warm and smooth. It was the bamboo slip that recorded the refining method of the 5-spirit cauldron that she was holding in her palm just now. Meng-Chi's mind moved slightly. After the core formation stage, her control of spiritual sense and spiritual aura was far better than that of the Zhuji stage. She extracted a wisp of spiritual aura from her spiritual sea and wrapped the bamboo slip around the 5-spirit cauldron. The spiritual aura wrapped around the bamboo slip like silk threads. Slowly, like a layer of cocoon, the entire bamboo slip was wrapped inside. There was also a clear light flowing out of the bamboo slip, which in turn illuminated Meng-Chi's spiritual sea. She carefully extracted another wisp of spiritual aura from her spiritual sea and wrapped it around the bamboo slip as well. A moment later, another wisp of spiritual aura appeared. Meng-Chi patiently separated a total of 48 wisps of spiritual aura from her spiritual sea and wrapped them around the bamboo slip little by little. The bamboo slip had long been wrapped in layers of spiritual aura, but the clear light it emitted could still pour out through the thick cocoon of spiritual aura. As the clear light scattered, the spiritual aura wrapped around the bamboo slip seemed to no longer be controlled by Meng-Chi. Instead, it began to be controlled by the clear light of the bamboo slip and began to spin rapidly. Meng-Chi held her breath and extracted the last wisp of spiritual aura from her spiritual sea, wrapping it around the glowing ball of spiritual aura that was getting bigger and bigger. With a soft pop sound, the glowing ball of spiritual aura suddenly jumped twice. Then the shape of the originally round glowing ball began to change. At the bottom of the glowing ball, 3 small bumps slowly grew out. At first, the bumps were just small bulges, but slowly, they grew a little longer. At the same time, the upper half of the glowing ball began to gradually flatten and gradually concave. The entire glowing ball began to transform into the shape of a small cauldron. This process would be very slow and would take about 24 hours. However, Mengqi was not in a hurry. She exhaled. In fact, the first step was to build the foundation of the natal magic treasure. The first step was not difficult. As long as she could get the bamboo slip or jade slip that recorded the method of refining the natal magic treasure, she would have already succeeded in half. The difficult part was to find the necessary heavenly materials and earthly treasures, and then further refine the magic treasures so that they would have different characteristics. For example, this 5-spirit cauldron was not very different from other natal medicine refining cauldrons when it first built its foundation. If Mengqi could not find the 5 elements materials needed to refine the 5-spirit cauldron, such as fire feather, chaos vine, and nether iron, then the 5-spirit cauldron would not be a 5-spirit cauldron. At most, it would just be a small natal medicine refining cauldron. There was nothing magical about it. But now Mengqi stroked her storage bag. She already had the nether iron. She was at least 1/5 of the way to the completion of the 5-spirit cauldron. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. She turned to look at Yun Qingyan, who was still sitting quietly on the bed. This was all thanks to Qingyan's henjun. However, she did not know when he would be done today. Su Junmo, Sister Shui, and the others were still waiting for her. Mengqi looked at the time. The time for an incense stick to burn had already passed, but Yun Qingyan still had no intention of stopping. How about? She took out the jade slip of the sky beyond heaven, and prepared to tell her friends not to wait for her today. They did not have to set off to the Starfall Sea immediately tomorrow. She could ask them to wait for her for another day. After she asked Yun Qingyan if she could tell them something about the situation in the Starfall Sea, they would give up on the idea of coming to the Starfall Sea. As for how she would get out in the future, Mengqi glanced at Yun Qingyan again. If Qingyan's henjun wanted to stay here for a long time, she could also stay and follow him. Mengqi made up her mind. She reached out and held the jade slip of the sky beyond heaven tightly. Ah! Before she could send her spiritual energy into the jade slip, a huge force suddenly pounced on her with the force of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Mengqi was caught off guard. Her whole body fell backward. The jade slip in her hand also left her hand. It drew a slanted trajectory in the air, and landed on the ground beside her. Mengqi did not have time to care about the jade slip. She pushed off the ground with her hand and jumped up. Before she could stand up straight, another huge gust of wind rushed toward her. This time, the wind carried tiny water droplets. The water droplets were crystal clear and looked exceptionally cute. However, Mengqi knew that if she was hit by these cute little water droplets, her body might be directly penetrated. She suddenly leaned back, narrowly avoiding some of the small and exquisite water droplets. Qingyan's henjun. This was the first thought that flashed through her mind. Did something happen? Mengqi did not care about her embarrassment. She rolled on the ground, and then jumped up again. The room, which was still quiet just now seemed to have just experienced a catastrophe. The light gauze hanging from the roof had completely disappeared. Even the carved bed had disappeared. Yun Qingyan was still sitting cross-legged, but his whole body was floating in the air. There was no wind in the room, but his sleeves were fluttering. The hem of his robe was raised and made a chi-chi sound, like the sound of a sharp knife cutting through the air. As if he felt Mengqi's gaze, Yun Qingyan suddenly opened his eyes and looked at her. The blood in his eyes was thicker. They were as cold as ice and frost. He was like a demon, extremely strange and charming. Beside him, a transparent and formless red flame suddenly ignited. After a short while, black water poured out and extinguished the flames. Then, Yun Qingyan was enveloped in the water. The water was transparent. Mengqi could see his clothes rolling in the water. In the blink of an eye, the huge rock suppressed the black water and fell from the sky. The dark gray rock was still transparent. It looked terrifying, but it did not even break a single hair on Yun Qingyan's head. In the blink of an eye, countless young saplings grew out of the rock. The rock fell apart and turned into countless fragments, completely dissipating. The transparent flame swept over again and burned the saplings. Meng-Chi took a deep breath and barely suppressed the shock in her heart. She could guess that these strange phenomena should be the manifestation of the 5 spirits' vitality that Yun Qingyan used to heal his injuries. But why was it like this? Although she had never tried to use the 5 spirits' vitality to treat illnesses, the 5 elements in the world restrained and also reinforced each other. Only in this way could they circulate endlessly. If the 5 spirits' vitality was used to treat illnesses, it should not be like this. It should be the 5 elements reinforcing each other. Only in this way could they circulate endlessly. Yun Qingyan, right? Meng-Chi's heart suddenly moved. Above her spiritual sea, the bamboo slip that Lin Yin gave her suddenly lit up. She hurriedly sent a wisp of divine sense into it. She could only read the first 4 volumes of the bamboo slip. Now, after the 4th volume, there was new content that she had never seen before. The 5 elements repel each other. This is a sign of qi deviation. Meng-Chi was stunned. She hurriedly withdrew her divine sense and looked at Yun Qingyan. Could it be that Qingyan's Henjun was about to enter qi deviation? The huge rock suppressed the black water again. The saplings broke out of the ground. And then the flames burned. The blood in Yun Qingyan's eyes was even thicker than before. There was even a faint black aura flashing in them. The gaze in those eyes was also like knives and ice. There was no warmth in them. Meng-Chi held her breath and took a step forward. In her spiritual sea, a second line of words appeared on the bamboo slip that Lin Yin gave her. 5 Essences Meditation Mantra. Meng-Chi quickly scanned the mantra. The meditation mantra was a common mantra used to straighten out the spiritual aura of qi deviation. Previously, Qin Xiaoma was stabbed in the back by a friend. He was seriously injured during the tribulation and went into qi deviation. His spiritual aura was in a mess. Meng-Chi relied on the meditation mantra to heal him. The 5 Essences meditation mantra on the bamboo slip was very similar to the meditation mantra, but more complicated and powerful. When Meng-Chi learned cultivation mantras, the attack mantras were extremely slow. However, the medical mantras were completely different. In addition, she already knew the meditation mantra. Not only did she know it, but she also practiced it to the 4th level. Later, her medical skills advanced to the 4th level, and the meditation mantra also reached the 5th level. Meng-Chi closed her eyes, and the spiritual aura in her body slowly circulated. The 5 Essences meditation mantra was based on the meditation mantra. She only tried it twice and completely mastered it. Moreover, she was surprised to find that the 5 Essences meditation mantra seemed to be the same as the meditation mantra. As soon as she learned it, it was already at the 5th level. Meng-Chi took a deep breath. She took out the last bottle of North Dark Dan from her storage bag. There were still 9 North Dark Dan inside. The 5 Essences meditation mantra consumed even more spiritual aura. Meng-Chi wasn't sure how many times she could use it. She took out another porcelain bottle. There was only 1 dark blue Dan inside. This was the Tsangming powder. It could instantly raise a Xiujia's cultivation to the great circle of the same major realm. Even if one couldn't use their spiritual aura for 3 days after taking it, their realm could drop if they weren't careful. However, whatever. Meng-Chi finished her preparations and walked towards Yun Qingyan. She had only taken 1 step when she was forced to sway slightly by the strong wind. Qingyan's Henjun. Meng-Chi softened her voice and said seriously, "I won't harm you." She opened her eyes wide and met Yun Qingyan's blood-red and emotionless eyes. Since it was just a sign of going crazy, then it meant that she hadn't gone crazy yet. Meng-Chi had practiced medicine for many years, and was clear about this kind of subtle difference. So she was certain that Yun Qingyan still had a clear mind and knew what she was saying. As expected, the strong wind that was pressing down on Meng-Chi and making it hard for her to breathe seemed to lessen. She held her breath and carefully took a step forward, walking steadily towards Yun Qingyan. Qingyan's Henjun. Meng-Chi walked step by step and finally reached the man's side. The 5-element apparitions seemed to be powerful, but in reality, they only affected Yun Qingyan. She didn't feel anything. The spiritual aura that the other person instinctively released to defend himself had a greater impact on Meng-Chi. Meng-Chi had already put away the medicine knife. She stuffed the Dan into her mouth and separated a small thread of spiritual aura to surround the Dan. This didn't use much spiritual aura, and allowed her to control these North Dark Dan. She could use them one by one for her own use. As for the dark blue Tsangming Dan, Meng-Chi prepared to use it at the end. She stretched out her hands and the fingertips of both hands flickered. The 5 Skanda meditation mantra instantly took away 1/10 of her spiritual aura. Meng-Chi smiled bitterly. At times like this, she especially hated that she wasn't strong enough. If she was already in the spirit-severing stage, or even if she was in the nascent soul stage, her chances would be much higher. Meng-Chi reached out and held Yun Qingyan's hands. The other party's slender and strong fingers were shockingly cold. As soon as she put her hand on them, a huge amount of chaotic spiritual aura rushed into her body. At times like this, Meng-Chi calmed down. She closed her eyes and ignored the powerful spiritual aura that was washing her meridians. She slowly circulated the 5 Skanda meditation mantra and carefully probed Yun Qingyan's body bit by bit. At first, Meng-Chi could only send a little of the 5 Skanda meditation mantra into Yun Qingyan's body. Soon, it was crushed into nothingness by the spiritual aura in Yun Qingyan's body, which was much stronger than hers. The spiritual aura flowed into her body in reverse and cut through Meng-Chi's meridians like knives and swords. She frowned slightly and her body trembled slightly. The dim light on her fingertips lit up again. Meng-Chi had a 5th realm cultivation technique and was already a 4th grade medical cultivator. Even in the Trichiliocosm, she could barely save a spirit-severing stage cultivator. When Yun Qingyan was intact, he was definitely not in the spirit-severing stage. However, his injuries were too serious. Even in the Starfall Sea's great desolate island, he recovered some of his strength with the help of the 5 spirits' primordial qi. However, the strength he recovered was less than 10% of his original strength. The spiritual aura he could mobilize now was only 10% to 20% of his recovered strength. Therefore, although Meng-Chi was very uncomfortable, she couldn't bear it completely. She held Yun Qingyan's hands tightly and stubbornly sent the 5 Skanda meditation mantra into his body again and again. The North Dark pills melted one by one and filled Meng-Chi's dry spiritual sea. Time seemed to have passed for a long time, but also seemed to have passed in an instant. Meng-Chi's spiritual sea was full and empty again. The violent and chaotic spiritual aura in Yun Qingyan's body was finally no longer as chaotic as before. It was filled with indescribable aggression and hostility. Under the pacification of Meng-Chi's mantras, they gradually calmed down. If Meng-Chi opened her eyes to take a look at this moment, she would discover that the 5 elements around Yun Qingyan's body were no longer as terrifying as before. At least, it didn't seem as vast and terrifying as before. However, the blood-red color in the other party's eyes was still deep and thick, and it was getting redder and redder. When the 7th North Dark pill turned into spiritual aura and filled Meng-Chi's spiritual sea, the back of the green-robed girl's clothes was already soaked. Fine and dense beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Her originally fair forehead was covered in dense sweat. Even the tip of her jade-like nose was soaked with sweat. Meng-Chi's originally bright red lips also became a little pale. She was originally standing in front of Yun Qingyan. At this moment, her thin body was trembling slightly, and her hair was soaked with sweat, as if she would collapse at any moment. However, Meng-Chi could feel that the spiritual aura in the other party's body was becoming smoother and quieter. She heaved a sigh of relief and didn't dare to let go of her hands, afraid that if she didn't pay attention, all her previous efforts would be wasted. After all, there were hidden dangers when external forces interfered with and smoothed out the spiritual aura. If all her previous efforts were wasted, Meng-Chi was worried that Yun Qingyan would directly suffer from qi deviation because of her counterattack, and it might even be worse than before. The 8th North Dark pill, then the 9th, Meng-Chi could already reach the edge of Yun Qingyan's spiritual sea. Under the effect of the 5 Skanda meditation mantra, even that pitch-black void didn't seem so terrifying anymore. Finally, the last bit of spiritual aura was used up. She didn't have any more North Dark pills, but she still had the Tsangming powder. The Tsangming powder could allow her to instantly become a perfected Jindan cultivator. In that case, it should be enough. When Meng-Chi thought of this, She opened her eyes slightly and smiled slightly at Yin Qingyan with half-closed eyes. She knew that she definitely looked a little disheveled right now. She could even feel the coldness on her back, and her clothes were soaked with sweat. Mengqi's heart moved slightly. The spiritual aura wrapped around the Tsangming powder was withdrawn, and the Tsangming powder dispersed. She smiled at Yin Qingyan again. Although the white-robed man's eyes were still bloodshot, they weren't as cold as before. Mengqi closed her eyes again. At this moment, she suddenly felt a heavy weight on her shoulder, and a strong force attacked her. Mengqi didn't have time to react at all. She felt the world spin, and with a heavy weight on her back, she was already heavily pressed to the ground. Chapter 106. Ugh! Mengqi's brows furrowed tightly. Her back hit the ground, and something soft gently supported her. It didn't hurt much. However, Yin Qingyan's hand that was holding her shoulder was extremely strong, as if it was going to crush her shoulder. Mengqi opened her eyes, and the other person's small figure was reflected in her clear black and white eyes. Unfortunately, Yin Qingyan's eyes were still blood red, and she couldn't see her own reflection. However, even if she couldn't see, Mengqi knew that the two of them were in a very strange position. At this moment, Yin Qingyan's other hand, which she was holding tightly in her hand, was about to pull away. Mengqi suddenly exerted strength in her hand, and held his slender and strong hand tightly in her palm. Qingyan's Henjun. She was a little anxious, and her breathing became rapid. The overbearing medicinal power of the Tsangming powder spread throughout her body, and the spiritual energy in Mengqi's spiritual sea surged and spread wildly in all directions. Her spiritual sea seemed to be pushed by the overflowing spiritual energy, and rapidly expanded. Although they were in the same major realm, a first-stage Golden Core cultivator, who had just entered the Golden Core stage, couldn't be compared to a Golden Core perfected Golden Core cultivator. There was a saying in the three realms that cultivators could only be considered to have truly stepped onto the Great Tao after forming their Golden Core. The gap between foundation building and Qi cultivators wasn't large, but the gap between Golden Core and foundation building was very large. When one reached the Golden Core stage, the increase in each minor realm was almost equivalent to advancing from foundation building to Golden Core. The Tsangming powder's medicinal power was already overbearing, and the wildly surging spiritual energy seemed to have set off stormy waves in her spiritual sea. The feeling of her spiritual sea being forced open was very uncomfortable. Mengqi clenched her teeth tightly, and her right hand gripped Yin Qingyan's hand even more tightly, continuously sending spiritual energy into his body. She used the 5 skanda meditation mantra to the extreme, and with the support of the sudden abundance of spiritual energy, it became slightly stronger than before. Mengqi even felt that she could now explore Yin Qingyan's boundless, but terrifyingly huge spiritual sea. The 5 Yin Qingyan meditation mantra was like a trickling stream. Under her efforts, it continuously calmed down Yin Qingyan's chaotic spiritual aura. Azu. Or Qingyan's Henjun. The slender fingers in Mengqi's hand struggled again. She was shocked. Yin Qingyan had her pinned to the ground, and his handsome face was only a hand's length away from hers. Mengqi could clearly see the desolation in his blood-red eyes that was so indifferent that it was devoid of any living being's emotions. She didn't dare to let go. If he let go now, not only would all his efforts go to waste, Yin Qingyan might really go crazy. Mengqi gritted his teeth and held Yin Qingyan's hand even tighter. The hand that was squeezing her shoulder tightened as well. The pain was so intense that her left shoulder started to go numb. Even her left arm didn't seem to be hers anymore. She couldn't feel her fingertips either. But his right hand, Mengqi used almost all her strength to hold Yin Qingyan's hand tightly. Under the influence of the Tsangming powder, the spiritual aura in her body became stronger and stronger, and her spiritual sea also became bigger. In the end, it was about 20 times bigger than before. Mengqi's spiritual aura was unprecedentedly abundant. She simply ignored her left shoulder and held Yin Qingyan's hand tightly. Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi looked into Yin Qingyan's eyes. Her eyes were clear and bright, and her expression was gentle. There was no resentment in her eyes. "I won't hurt you," she softened her voice. "Trust me." The blood-red color in the white-robed man's eyes seemed to disperse in an instant. But soon, it became even stronger than before. Just like that, he stared straight at Meng Qi with those emotionless eyes. Qingyan's. Meng Qi repeated softly. I will never hurt you. She met Yin Qingyan's eyes without avoiding them. Her gaze was magnanimous, and her expression was sincere. Her right hand was still firmly holding Yin Qingyan's left hand, and the spiritual aura had never been cut off. Meng Qi's left shoulder became lighter. The hand holding her shoulder relaxed a little, and the piercing pain returned in an instant. Her entire left arm seemed to have suddenly been pierced by thousands of thin and dense needles. Meng Qi's face was slightly pale, and the blood on her lips faded. She blinked gently. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and more beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Qingyan's. Meng Qi's voice was still soft. I'm Meng Qi. I will never hurt you, she murmured and repeated in a gentle tone, like a mother singing a bedtime song to her child, with an indescribable sense of comfort. Yin Qingyan gently raised her slender fingers. Her slightly cold fingertips gently touched Meng Qi's pale little face. Then she gently brushed her long eyelashes. Finally, it landed on her pale and slightly dry lips. Meng Qi was stunned. Yin Qingyan's fingers had already gently swept across her soft lips, and there seemed to be a trace of warmth on her fingertips. The blood in his eyes was still very thick, so Meng Qi couldn't see through his thoughts at all. However, his left hand, which was held by her, stopped struggling and no longer tried to pull away. Soon, even his right hand moved away from Meng Qi's lips, and he seemed to be slowly able to control his divine sense. Meng Qi breathed a sigh of relief, even though the two of them were still in a very strange position. But forget it. As long as Yin Qingyan was fine, it was fine. If he really suddenly wanted to hurt her, Meng Qi would definitely not be a match for Yin Qingyan, even if she had the help of the Tsangming powder, and temporarily raised her cultivation level to the peak of the Golden Core realm. Meng Qi slowly exhaled. She closed her eyes again, and began to concentrate on continuing to use the 5 Skanda Meditation Sutra to tidy up the spiritual aura in Yin Qingyan's body. However, in the next moment, Meng Qi felt a slight pain in her chin, and someone had already pinched it. She quickly opened her eyes and could only see Yin Qingyan's suddenly magnified face in front of her. Even at such a close distance, it was still a flawless face. Before she could react, she felt a warmth on her lips, and Yin Qingyan's lips had already covered hers. Meng Qi. Meng Qi. Her breathing became erratic. Meng Qi didn't know how she came back to her senses. Or perhaps her divine sense had been completely withdrawn from her body, and had been floating very high in the clouds. It made her float up and down, as if she was dreaming. Her mind was completely blank. Meng Qi was completely relying on her instincts to continue holding Yin Qingyan's hand and not let go. She had already used the 5 Skanda Meditation Sutra more than 100 times today. She was so familiar with it that she didn't need to control it at all. It could repeat itself and continuously enter Yin Qingyan's body. She couldn't. The only thought Meng Qi still had was that she couldn't let go of Yin Qingyan's hand. She even used more strength and held Yin Qingyan's left hand even tighter. Her ears were wet, and her mind was in a mess from the sound of breathing. Meng Qi thought she seemed to hear Yin Qingyan chuckle softly, but she could no longer think. She felt like she was a dream boat in the Starfall Sea, tossed high by the waves and then falling heavily back down. She could only rise and fall with the sea. Meng Qi didn't know how much time had passed. In her dizziness, the medicinal effect of the Tsangming powder gradually disappeared. Her forcefully expanded spiritual sea gradually dried up, revealing thin cracks. Within 3 days, she couldn't use her spiritual aura anymore, and the small cracks in her spiritual sea would slowly repair themselves. If she forcefully used her spiritual aura in these few days, or even used the Tsangming powder again, her spiritual sea would be severely damaged. If that happened, his spirit sea would be severely damaged, and might even completely collapse. If it was light, her realm would drop. If it was serious, she wouldn't be able to advance an inch for the rest of her life, and she might even lose her life. The last strand of the 5 Skanda Meditation Sutra entered Yin Qingyan's body from the fingertips of Meng Qi's right hand, which had never let go. She frowned. Her spiritual sea had dried up, and the side effects of the overbearing medicinal effect of the Tsangming powder made her very uncomfortable. Her body was sore and painful, and she was about to be exhausted. Meng Qi forced herself to open her eyes and look at Yin Qingyan. The man's face, which had always been calm and indifferent, was dyed with an expression she had never seen before. A few strands of sweat-soaked hair were stuck to his face. Not only did this not make Yin Qingyan ugly, but it also added some charm to him that she had never seen before. The blood in Yin Qingyan's eyes had faded, and the stars seemed to be reflected in his deep eyes that had become clear again. He seemed to be in disbelief as he looked at Meng Qi, who was still firmly suppressed by him. There were several red marks of different depths on the girl's smooth and slender neck, not to mention further down. Meng Qi. Yin Qingyan's voice was slightly hoarse as he called out to her softly. Ugh. Meng Qi snorted softly. His head tilted, and he completely fainted. Yin Qingyan. He was stunned for a moment. Looking at the pale face of the girl in his arms, he reached out to touch her wrist in bewilderment. Fortunately, Yin Qingyan heaved a sigh of relief. It was just that he had fainted from exhaustion. The Tsangming powder was overbearing, and Meng Qi had repeatedly overdrawn his spiritual aura. In the end, he even took the Tsangming powder, and Yin Qingyan's eyes flashed slightly as he looked at the marks he had left on Meng Qi's body. He closed his eyes and flicked his finger. A clear light enveloped the two of them. In the blink of an eye, their bodies became fresh and clean again. A soft and clean white robe wrapped around Meng Qi's thin body. Yin Qingyan stood up with her in his arms. The expression on his face was unpredictable, and the chaotic spiritual aura in his body had calmed down again. Even the originally empty spirit ocean had a small vortex of spiritual aura. It was slowly rotating, as if it could grow and multiply endlessly, and become stronger and stronger. Yin Qingyan's gaze swept across the room. The originally elegant room seemed to have experienced a terrible catastrophe. Everything had turned into ashes, and it was empty as if it had never existed. He lowered his head and looked at the unconscious girl in his arms. Meng Qi's soft cherry lips were slightly red and swollen, which made her small face look even paler. Yin Qingyan. His expression became more and more complicated. Now that he was completely awake and had regained his consciousness, he knew clearly what had just happened. Yin Qingyan's gaze followed Meng Qi's elegant little face, her delicate and small chin, then her fair and slender neck, her narrow shoulders and her thin arms, then, it was her slender fingers that were like spring onions. Meng Qi clearly didn't look that strong, but Yin Qingyan remembered it clearly. Just now, from the beginning to the end, even when he treated her like that, Meng Qi had never let go of his hand. He exhaled heavily, exhaling the turbid air in his chest. Why? Why did she do this? Yin Qingyan had seen Meng Qi's stubbornness and tenacity. He knew that she was a girl who would stick to her heart and fight to the end once she made up her mind. But why? Did she have to sacrifice herself to save him? Yin Qingyan was silent. He carried Meng Qi and left his empty room. He had just stepped out of the room. The door of the room diagonally opposite Meng Qi's room was opened from the inside with a creak. Yi Wu, who had slightly recovered, stood at the door. She didn't seem to expect that the first person she saw when she woke up was not Meng Qi, but a handsome man she had never seen before. Yin Qingyan stopped and looked at Yi Wu from the corner of her eyes. The Demon Realm warlord, who had always been decisive and sharp, was only stunned for a moment before he quickly came back to his senses. Yi Wu's gaze quickly swept over Meng Qi, who was in the other party's arms, and then looked up at Yin Qingyan. Her spiritual sea was shattered, and her storage bag had been lost when she fell into the Starfall Sea. She didn't have any weapons, and she couldn't use any spells. Yi Wu instantly became alert and looked at Yin Qingyan warily. If she wasn't mistaken, Meng Qi had fainted. He was clearly energetic just now, but now his face was pale, and he was in someone's arms. Who are you? Although it was obvious that Yin Qingyan wasn't someone she could afford to offend, Yi Wu still asked, "What happened to Meng Qi?" Yin Qingyan glanced at her coldly. He carried Meng Qi and didn't stop walking, delicately walking into the depths of the manor. "Stop." Yi Wu bowed slightly, like a cheetah ready to pounce. His gaze was cold and sharp as he looked at the white-robed man with a cold expression. "What happened to Meng Qi?" "Go back." Yin Qingyan flicked his sleeves. He didn't stop walking. but a gust of wind rushed towards Yiwu. A strong gust of wind swept up the tall Devil World battleship and threw her back into her room, closing the door behind her. Yiwu jumped up and rushed towards the door again. Although the gust of wind was strong, Yin Qingyan had obviously shown mercy, so she wasn't injured. She hurriedly opened the door again, but it was quiet outside. Even the white-robed man's tall figure had disappeared. Yiwu wanted to step out of the door, but as soon as she stepped out of the door, a resistance threw her back into the room. She jumped up again. Although she wasn't injured, her spiritual sea was indeed damaged, and she was no different from an ordinary person. The white-robed man flicked his sleeves. He was so powerful. Yiwu felt a chill run down her back. Mengqi was unconscious and fell into the hands of such a strong person. Then she looked worriedly outside the door, countless thoughts flashing through her mind. This was obviously a manner. Yiwu quickly judged. It was the morning of the second day after Mengqi brought her back. The sun had already risen, but the stars in the sky were still bright. Even the sunlight couldn't take away the brightness of the stars. This place should still be in the Starfall Sea. To be able to own such a manor in the Starfall Sea, Yiwu sucked in a breath of cold air. What was the background of this handsome and otherworldly white-robed man? As far as she knew, even the masters of the 5 great demon residences in the demon realm couldn't do it. Yiwu stood worriedly at the door. Was it because Mengqi had saved her and angered the master of this place? Was that why he was treated like that? Yiwu's jaw tightened. If that was the case, then she would try to save Mengqi even if she had to risk her life. Mengqi didn't know how long she had slept. In a daze, she could feel her empty spiritual sea. There wasn't a single drop of spiritual aura left, and there were many small cracks in her spiritual sea. The inner core was still dutifully rotating slowly. Wisps of spiritual aura slowly fell from it, and fell into the spiritual sea. But in an instant, the spiritual aura flowed away from those cracks. Her spiritual sea was still empty. Next to the inner core, the embryonic form of the 5-spirit cauldron was no different from before. Without spiritual aura in the spiritual sea, there was no way to continue refining the natal magic treasure. The light of the small cauldron that was already in the shape of a small cauldron had become a little dim. If it weren't for another bamboo slip wrapped in a soft white light of spiritual aura, there would be wisps of spiritual aura wrapped around the small cauldron, preventing it from completely disappearing. Perhaps when Mengqi was unconscious, the embryonic form of the 5-spirit cauldron had completely dissipated. Ugh! She snorted softly. Not only was her spiritual sea dry, but her body was also sore and painful. She felt as if she had fallen from a high place and fallen straight to the ground. Even her limbs were sore and her head was dizzy, as if it was filled with something. She didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. But she couldn't go on like this. Mengqi struggled hard, trying to wake herself up quickly. She vaguely remembered that she still had something to do and had to wake up as soon as possible. There was still someone waiting. Yes, there was still someone waiting for her. But what was it? In a daze, Mengqi raised her right hand slightly, her fingers trembling a few times. Don't move. A deep and pleasant male voice sounded in her ears. Not only was the voice very pleasant, it also sounded very familiar, making her feel that she should listen to the other party. Mengqi had just raised her hand, but she obediently put it down again. Someone pulled the blanket up until it reached her delicate chin. Thank you. Mengqi couldn't even open her eyes, but she still murmured her thanks. Her divine sense was still a little clear, but she had overdrawn her spiritual aura. Coupled with the overbearing effects of the Tsangming powder, she was so weak that she even found it difficult to open her eyes. But she vaguely knew that someone was right beside her. This person was someone she could trust wholeheartedly. With him around, she didn't need to hurry to wake up. In a daze, Mengqi fell asleep again. She didn't know how long she slept. When she woke up again, she felt weak all over, but the soreness was slightly better. Although her spiritual sea was still as dry as before, the cracks in her spiritual sea seemed to be fewer than before. In the air above her spiritual sea, there were still strands of spiritual aura coming out of the bamboo slips, wrapping around the 5-spirit cauldron. The inner core was floating on the side, looking brighter than before. Meng-Chi still felt very tired, but slightly better than before. Although her eyelids were still very heavy, it wasn't like before, when just opening them required all her strength. Her long eyelashes fluttered twice, and she slowly opened her eyes. Meng-Chi's vision was a little dim, but it wasn't pitch black. The faint light was very gentle, and didn't make her feel uncomfortable at all. She finally opened her eyes completely, and what entered her sight was a soft veil hanging down from the roof. Meng-Chi slowly blinked her eyes. Her body was still very weak, but her mind was slowly becoming clear. Where was this? Meng-Chi moved her body slightly, and the soft and light silk blanket covered her chin. She was also wearing clean and fresh clothes. Apart from the soreness that had yet to fade, she didn't feel any discomfort. She took a deep breath, supported herself with one hand on the bed, and tried to sit up. As soon as Meng-Chi moved, a hand reached out and pulled the thin blanket over her, supporting her back through the blanket and helping her sit up. She turned her head to look beside her. Yin Qingyan was sitting on the recliner by the bed. Under the soft light of the night pearl, Meng-Chi could even see his every move clearly. The white-robed man had one leg stretched out, and the other was casually stepping on the recliner. He was leaning slightly and gently supporting her. Qingyan's. Meng-Chi's eyes suddenly lit up. Are you okay? Yin Qingyan. He looked at Meng-Chi with a complicated expression. The joy on the girl's face was sincere, and even her sparkling eyes were clear and clean. Meng-Chi subconsciously reached out her right hand to Yin Qingyan's wrist, and a faint light lit up on her fingertips. Ugh, she groaned. She felt that she had slept for a long time, but in fact it had only been a day and a night. The overbearing effects of the Tsangming powder had yet to fade. She used her spiritual aura, and her spiritual sea shook, making her dizzy. Yin Qingyan grabbed Meng-Chi's hand. When she came back to her senses, she felt a huge amount of pure spiritual aura slowly flowing into her body. Her spiritual sea felt like it had been sprinkled by rain, and she instantly felt like she was bathing in a spring breeze. However, the spiritual aura was quickly withdrawn. Yin Qingyan said, "Your spiritual sea hasn't recovered yet. It can't take it." Okay. Meng-Chi nodded obediently. Yin Qingyan was much stronger than her. He wasn't a medical cultivator, so he didn't know any medical cultivation techniques. It was okay for him to help her stabilize her shaking spiritual sea. If he really sent a large amount of spiritual aura into Meng-Chi's body to help her repair her spiritual sea, her spiritual sea might have exploded, and she might have died. Qingyan's. Meng-Chi looked up at him again. Are you okay? I'm fine. Yin Qingyan's expression was complicated. That's good. Meng-Chi breathed a sigh of relief. Although she couldn't use her spiritual aura, her divine sense had completely recovered. After receiving Yin Qingyan's confirmation, she simply closed her eyes and used her divine sense to explore her body. Thank goodness. Meng-Chi breathed a sigh of relief. Her inner core wasn't damaged. In the air above her spiritual sea, wisps of spiritual aura were still seeping out of her inner core. Next to her inner core, even the embryonic form of the five-spirit cauldron was still there. Wisps of white light came out of the bamboo slip that Lin Yan gave her, completely enveloping the five-spirit cauldron. Meng-Chi breathed a big sigh of relief again. She took a risk at that time. Fortunately, Senior Lin Yan was there. Otherwise, her five-spirit cauldron might have been a failure. Without the bamboo slip that recorded the refining method of the five-spirit cauldron, even if she found all the precious materials, she wouldn't be able to refine this natal magic weapon. Meng-Chi breathed a big sigh of relief again. In addition, she was surprised to find that her meditation technique, and the five-essence meditation technique, had reached the peak of the fifth realm. She was only one step away from reaching the sixth realm. Sixth level incantation, even if it was just the most basic meditation incantation, was no small matter. Also, her medical skills had improved slightly, from the first realm of the fourth realm to the second realm. Oh, not bad. Meng-Chi was instantly filled with joy. The embryonic form of the five-spirit cauldron that she was most worried about was still there, and she had additional gains. Now she just couldn't use her spiritual aura for 3 days. This was really nothing. Meng-Chi opened her eyes and met Yin Qingyan's eyes. She couldn't help but smile sweetly. Qing Yan's Henjun, my medical skills have reached the second realm of the fourth realm. Chapter 107. Ming-Chi couldn't help but smile. Qing Yan's Henjun, my medical skills have reached the second realm of the fourth rank. Yin Qing Yan. I've also reached the fifth realm of the meditation technique, Ming-Chi said again. Yin Qing Yan. Thank you Qing Yan's Henjun, for taking care of me when I was unconscious, Ming-Chi said sincerely. She lifted the quilt and wanted to get out of bed. I'm fine now, but I can't use spiritual energy for the time being. Ming-Chi looked calm. Yin Qingyan stared at her pale little face for a moment and didn't see anything wrong with it. However, as soon as she moved, her body, which hadn't fully recovered, went limp and fell forward. Ming-Chi's arm was warm. Yin Qingyan reached out to support her. Thank you. She shook her head to get rid of the sudden dizziness and thanked Yin Qingyan with a smile. Ming-Chi was a little embarrassed. I'm still too weak. Yin Qingyan. His expression was quite complicated. Was it a question of whether she was weak or not? Ming-Chi. Did she not remember anything at all? He was cruel and violent. How could he do such a thing to her? Ming-Chi. Yin Qingyan said in a slightly hoarse voice and stared at Ming-Chi. He closed his eyes. It was rare for the demon lord, who had always been decisive in killing, to hesitate. Yesterday I treated you that way. Oh. Ming-Chi guessed what he was going to say. She waved her hand and said casually, It's okay. It's okay? Yin Qingyan was startled. Yes. Ming-Chi nodded. It's okay. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her bare feet hung down, and faint red marks could be seen on her fair and slender ankles. It was the same for white wrist. Yin Qingyan's white robe was loosely draped over her body, revealing Ming-Chi's slender neck. There were still a few dark red marks on her delicate skin, spreading from her neck down to her collarbone. In the end, it disappeared into the white robe, causing one's imagination to run wild. Ming-Chi reached out and tucked a few strands of hair behind her ear. Yin Qingyan's eyes followed her every move. She looked at her small earlobes and her long black hair. After being in a coma for a day and a night, Ming-Chi's hair was a little messy, which made her small face look even more beautiful and delicate. Ming-Chi said. Qing Yan's Henjun was on the verge of Qigong deviation at that time. His spiritual aura was chaotic, and he didn't know what he was doing at all. Furthermore, she really felt that it was nothing. I'm not hurt either. Ming-Chi explained seriously. My cultivation level isn't high enough, so I need to use the Tsangming powder. I can't use my spiritual aura for the time being. The cracks in my spiritual sea are also caused by the overbearing medicinal properties of the Tsangming powder. This will recover in 3 days. This has nothing to do with Qing Yan's Henjun. Yin Qingyan's expression became more and more complicated. She looked at Ming-Chi with a heavy gaze. After Ming-Chi said what she needed to say, she had already taken out her spare green robe, shoes and socks from her storage bag. She had just leaned over to put them on when Yin Qingyan reached out and took them. I'll do it. He reached out and held her smooth ankle in front of him, while his other hand naturally put on her shoes and socks. When the warm and dry hand clasped her skin, Ming-Chi finally felt a little strange. Her face suddenly felt a little hot. The place where Yin Qingyan clasped seemed to have become strange. It seemed that there were tiny insects crawling around there. It was itchy and bit by bit, it tickled from her ankle to the bottom of her heart. Ming-Chi subconsciously retracted her foot. She looked up and met Yin Qingyan's deep eyes. I can do it myself. Ming-Chi murmured. She couldn't use her spiritual aura now. Otherwise, she wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. She could change into new clothes in the blink of an eye. Yin Qingyan looked away. He didn't say anything. He just clasped Ming-Chi's ankle almost stubbornly and carefully put on her stockings. Yin Qingyan got up and turned to walk out of the door. As for the rest, his voice was a little dry and hoarse. His fingertips still felt the delicate touch of the girl's skin. Yin Qingyan felt a little headache. He strode out of the door. The door opened and then closed. Ming-Chi slowly withdrew her gaze. She lowered her eyes and stared at her feet in a daze. She sat alone on the bed for a moment. It was very strange. She didn't think much of what had happened before. Sometimes, doctors would be exposed to all kinds of great dangers when treating illnesses and saving people. She wasn't injured, her life wasn't harmed, and her cultivation level even improved. As she said, the Tsangming powder was too strong, so she couldn't use her spiritual aura for 3 days. This was completely acceptable to Meng Qi. But just now she felt really strange just now. Yin Qingyan didn't urge her. Meng Qi sat in a daze for a moment before she changed into a green robe and put on her boots. She jumped out of bed, feeling refreshed and comfortable. Although she still couldn't use her spiritual aura for the time being, the soreness in her body had lessened a lot after sleeping for so long. Meng Qi stomped her feet, took a deep breath, and went forward to open the door. This was no longer the room they were staying in now. Outside the door was a much larger garden. There were flowers and trees, and there was even a small pond. An arc-shaped flying bridge crossed over the pond. At one end of the bridge, there was a tall tree. Yin Qingyan, dressed in a white robe, stood under the tree. He stood with his hands behind his back. His face was stunning as he looked quietly at the pond. The lotus flowers were blooming there. They were a little different from the ones Meng Qi had seen in the past. On the same flower, there were purple and white petals. They were layered and looked exceptionally beautiful. Some of the lotus flowers had already withered, and the remaining lotus heads were standing in the wind, swaying gently. Meng Qi's attention was immediately attracted by the lotus flowers. Purple wave. It's the purple wave lotus. She couldn't believe it. There's such a large area here? God. The 3,000 worlds are almost extinct. I heard that there might still be remnants of the demon world, but they're very rare. According to the records, they haven't appeared for hundreds of years. Meng Qi ran to the side of the pond and looked at the lotus pod. She couldn't use her spiritual aura, so she could only stretch her neck to look at them from a distance. She said, "The purple wave lotus itself can't be used as medicine. I heard that it blooms once every 10 years and bears fruit after 10 years. If the flowers fall and form a lotus head, the lotus seeds will mature after 10 years. They can cure all the fire and heat poisons in the world." Meng Qi looked at the lotus heads swaying in the wind with some envy. In some of the lotus heads, the lotus seeds had turned dark black. Obviously they had matured. There are so many of them here. It's so good. She murmured and turned to look at Yin Qingyan. This was a spiritual flower that she had only seen recorded in books. It had long been extinct in the 3,000 worlds. It was said that in the demon world, it could only be found in the most dangerous 33rd heaven at the bottom. However, the barrier between the demon world and the 3,000 worlds was very strong. Not to mention whether Meng Qi could go to the demon world. Even if she did, she estimated that she wouldn't be able to live to the 33rd heaven. Didi Pavilion. Moreover, it was said that the serene pond was extremely dangerous. A drop of water was enough to kill a nascent soul cultivator instantly. Meng Qi pursed her lips. There were so many of them here. Could she pick a lotus head? Yes. She looked expectantly at Yin Qingyan, under the big tree at the end of the flying bridge. The white-robed man's expression was more complicated than before. His deep eyes had been staring at Meng Qi without blinking ever since she went out. Meng Qi's face turned slightly red. After all, she wanted to ask for something, and what she wanted was the precious lotus seeds of the purple lotus. She looked away slightly, too embarrassed to look at Yin Qingyan. Meng Qi's breathing suddenly stopped, and her eyes instantly widened. She looked up at the big tree beside Yin Qingyan in disbelief. The big tree was very tall, and its leaves were green and luxuriant. In addition, there were also small and cute red fruits hanging between the leaves. The small fruits were round, and about the size of Meng Qi's pinky knuckle. They were gathered together in clusters and looked very attractive. Phoenix fruit. Meng Qi stamped her feet and ran to the big tree in a few steps. She tiptoed and looked up at the big tree. The leaves of the big tree were bigger than her palm. They were verdant and drooping on the branches. They looked like slender and elegant phoenix tail feathers, clustered around the bright red fruits. Meng Qi took a deep breath and couldn't believe her eyes. It's really the phoenix fruit. She was stunned. How many were there? The phoenix fruit was the main ingredient of the nirvana pill. The name of the Nirvana pill was enough to bring a seriously injured person back to life. As long as there was still a breath left, it could pull you back from the gates of hell, and at least save your life. This was not extinct like the purple lotus. As far as Mengqi knew, the phoenix fruit would occasionally appear in the 3,000 worlds. It was said that there was a phoenix fruit tree that was tens of thousands of years old in the demon realm, and it was with the heavenly demon phoenix. Even the feathers of the heavenly demon phoenix would occasionally spread to the 3,000 worlds. The phoenix fruit also appeared from time to time. Of course, the price was definitely not cheap. After all, it was the main ingredient of the Nirvana pill, and the Nirvana pill was a life-saving medicine. There was only hope if one was alive. The Nirvana pill's recipe was not complicated, and many disciples of the major medical cultivation sects knew it. It was just that the recipe was easy to get, but the phoenix fruit was difficult to find. Mengqi had never seen so many phoenix fruits before. She was simply mesmerized. There were at least thousands of phoenix fruits on the tree, which meant thousands of Nirvana pills. She subconsciously swallowed her saliva with some difficulty. That was thousands of lives. The heavenly auction house in Sky Beyond Heaven might occasionally sell Nirvana fruits, but one fruit would cost at least 10 Xian spirit stones. This was even more precious than the blazing feather. After all, without the blazing feather, at most, the power of the fire-type Dharma treasure would not be that strong. Or some cold poison that was difficult to cure. But the Nirvana fruit was life. Mengqi's hands that were hanging by her side relaxed, then slowly clenched, and relaxed again. Her fingers trembled slightly. Boo-hoo, I want it so much. I really want it. She couldn't use her spiritual energy now. Otherwise, even if Yin Qingyan was by her side, he might not agree to give it to her. Mengqi might not be able to control herself and quietly come over to pick a few Nirvana fruits. Yes, she also wanted to pick a purple lotus's lotus seed pod. Even one would do. As Mengqi thought, she looked at the gently swaying lotus seed pod in the pond again. She decided she would find a way to stay here. She would not leave. At least wait until she could use her spiritual energy to try it. You want it? Yin Qingyan's expression changed unpredictably, and his gaze finally fell on Mengqi's face. Had her gaze ever stopped on him since she left the house? Yin Qingyan's gaze became deep and cold. Yes. Mengqi immediately nodded without any intention of being tactful or courteous. Yin Qingyan did not immediately speak and just looked at her quietly. Mengqi was a little embarrassed by his gaze, so she quickly looked away and muttered, "There's no need to trouble Qingyan's Henjun. When my spiritual energy recovers, I can pick it myself. I only want 12. She pursed her lips. Could she take 12 Nirvana fruits from the entire tree? She could. Yin Qingyan had always been generous, so she definitely could. Yes. Yin Qingyan said, "I can give you even more." Mengqi's eyes lit up. She suddenly turned her head to look at the handsome man in white robes. Yin Qingyan was already very handsome. Even in the 3 realms of cultivators where there were countless beauties, he could still be called a great beauty. At this time he was wearing a white robe, and his black hair was tied up by a small black jade crown. He was so perfect that he looked like he had walked out of a painting. Yin Qingyan looked into Mengqi's eyes and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "You can have as many as you want." Mengqi. At this moment in her eyes, Yin Qingyan was so handsome that he could fly into the sky. He was the number 1 in the 3 realms. "Kiss me," Yin Qingyan said in a hoarse voice. "You can pick as many as you want." Mengqi was stunned. She stared at Yin Qingyan with a surprised look in her eyes. She understood every word of these 4 words, but when they were put together, Mengqi felt her mind go blank. She couldn't understand them at all. Kiss you." Mengqi could only repeat, her head tilted slightly. "Kiss where?" she instinctively asked. Her gaze slowly swept over Yin Qingyan's straight eyebrows, his starry eyes, and then his high nose. Finally, her gaze landed on his thin lips. Some messy memories appeared in his mind. It wasn't that Mengqi didn't remember. That day, Yin Qingyan's blood-red eyes were so thick that it seemed like they were going to devour her completely. She also remembered how domineering and passionate he was when he pressed his lips against hers. To her, this was probably the same kind of danger that she had encountered in the past when she was saving people. But at this time, the two of them were standing in a picturesque garden with clear minds. The white-robed man's eyes were clear, and he looked very calm. Mengqi hadn't moved yet. Yin Qingyan suddenly took a step forward. He raised his hand and pinched Mengqi's small chin. It was clearly just a warm fingertip, but when it touched the skin of her chin, it burned like a flame. Mengqi instinctively took a step back, tilted her head slightly, and opened Yin Qingyan's fingers. Before she could react, her face had already turned red. "Ha!" Yin Qingyan suddenly laughed softly. So it wasn't that she didn't feel anything at all. He almost thought that Mengqi really didn't care at all. He thought that in the eyes of the girl, he was no different from Ji Wujiang, Chu Tianfeng, and Qin Xiuma. He was just someone she wanted to save. So there was still a difference. Yin Qingyan's gaze softened. Forget it, forget it. He was in a good mood and waved his hand. You can pick it if you want. It doesn't matter if you pick it all. No need to kiss. Mengqi was obviously a little embarrassed, but when she heard this, she immediately became excited again. Where are the lotus seeds of the purple lotus? Mengqi glanced at him quietly. Yin Qingyan's lips even curled up slightly, and he seemed to be in a much better mood than before. They're all yours, Yin Qingyan said. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi breathed a sigh of relief and became happy again. She looked at Yin Qingyan again and quickly added, the phoenix fruit can be used to refine the nirvana pill. After it's refined, 90% of it will be given to Qingyan's Henjun. The lotus seeds of the purple lotus. Mengqi hesitated for a moment. This hasn't appeared in the 3,000 worlds for hundreds of years, and the pill recipe has been lost. So I don't know how to use it yet. When I figure it out, 90% of it will still be Qingyan's Henjun's. What did he want it for? Yin Qingyan glanced at Mengqi, but he saw the green-robed girl's clear eyes looking at him carefully. I can't use spiritual energy now. When I can, I'll come and pick it. Mengqi asked, can you? Yin Qingyan flicked his sleeve, and a strong wind rushed towards those lotus seeds. Ah! Mengqi exclaimed softly, but in the blink of an eye, pa sounds were heard, and the mature lotus seeds in the pond were already piled up in front of her obediently. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi was simply overjoyed. He leaned over and swept all the lotus seeds of the purple lotus into his storage bag. She wasn't worried that Yin Qingyan would go back on his word, but after all, a long delay meant trouble. Now that they were all in her storage bag, it was more secure. Before the phoenix fruit is refined into a pill, it needs to be preserved in a special container. Mengqi saw Yin Qingyan's gaze sweep over the tree full of phoenix fruit, and quickly said, I don't have that kind of thing right now. Yes, Yin Qingyan was indeed in a good mood. He thought for a moment and asked, is it a living bottle, or a container made of dried phoenix tree branches? Either is fine. Mengqi nodded repeatedly. Qingyan's Henjun, how do you know everything? You're really amazing. Yin Qingyan chuckled. The slightly awkward atmosphere between the two seemed to have completely disappeared. He turned back and looked at the girl's sparkling eyes, which were brighter and more beautiful than the stars. Mengqi's voice was actually a little sweet and soft, which didn't match her usual calm appearance. Now the other party was calling her Qingyan's Henjun, in such a voice and looking at her with such a worshipful gaze. Yin Qingyan flipped his hand, and a small and exquisite wooden box appeared in his palm. Phoenix wood box. Mengqi exclaimed, and his eyes were brighter than before. She raised her head and looked at Yin Qingyan. Other than here, it's said that only the ancestral land of the demon realm's heavenly demon phoenix has the only remaining phoenix tree in the 3 realms. Qingyan's Henjun, where did you get it? The living bottle was a kind of magic treasure. Although the refining process was complicated and expensive, it could still be found in the 3 realms. The living bottle needed to be refined by a weapon cultivator. It could contain all things and make all things immortal. It was one of the favorite magic treasures of medical cultivators. Mengqi was no exception. 100 years ago, I fought with a fellow from the Phoenix clan who was of the same generation as me. Yin Qingyan's tone was indifferent, and he said lightly, he lost a piece of phoenix wood to me. Amazing. Mengqi praised sincerely. When Yun Qingyan mentioned the heavenly demon phoenix, he suddenly remembered something. On the day of the competition, the last thing Ji Wujiong summoned from the array was the heavenly demon phoenix. He said, he should be related to the Phoenix clan. Oh. Mengqi nodded. Ji Wujiong. Phoenix Mengqi almost jumped up. She remembered what she had been vaguely worried about. Heavens beyond heaven. Su Junmo, Si Gongxing, and other friends were still waiting for her to reply to them. In the end, not only did she not have the chance to ask Yun Qingyan if she could tell others about him. Later, she was in a coma for so long. It had been more than a day, right? Si Gongxing, Sister Shui, and the others couldn't have left for the Starfall Sea, right? Mengqi didn't even care about the phoenix fruit. She quickly lowered her head and rummaged through her storage bag. Right. Her jade slip to heavens beyond heaven seemed to have fallen in Yun Qingyan's room that day, and she didn't have time to pick it up. Moreover, she couldn't use her spiritual energy now. How could she enter heavens beyond heaven? Mengqi frowned and withdrew her hand. What's wrong? Yun Qingyan asked when he saw her frown. My friends said that they would come to the Starfall Sea to save me. It's all my fault. Mengqi frowned even more. I wanted to leave at that time, so they decided to take the risk and go deep into the Starfall Sea to help me. Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi said, my bamboo slip to heavens beyond heaven seems to have fallen in your room. I want to look for it. You can't use your spiritual energy now. I can try, Mengqi said. I'm a golden core cultivator. The consequences of the shock of my spiritual sea aren't that serious. I can try. She paused and said, one more thing, Qingyan's Henjun. Can I tell my friends that I'm with you in the Starfall Sea, and that I'm very safe now? Can I tell them that they don't have to worry? Mengqi said. Otherwise, they won't believe that a golden core cultivator like me can survive in the Starfall Sea. Yun Qingyan looked deeply at Mengqi. Okay, he said. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi breathed a sigh of relief. Can I go look for the jade slip to heavens beyond heaven now? Mengqi. Yun Qingyan called her and stared into her eyes for a moment. He suddenly handed her a small and shiny white jade token. What's this? Mengqi was puzzled. Even with the phoenix wood box, it's difficult for you to pick all the phoenix fruits in one go. This is the token of the falling cloud manor on the great desolate island. Take it, and you can come and go as you wish. Cough. Yun Qingyan coughed softly. Just like the owner of this place. Oh. Mengqi nodded. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. I'll return it in time when I'm done. Yun Qingyan was speechless. She put away the token and turned to look around. The room from before. You're looking for Su Junmo and Si Gongxing? Yun Qingyan asked. Yes. Mengqi said. I'll go there for you. Yun Qingyan said. Can you? Mengqi's eyes lit up. Then I'll have to trouble you, Qingyan's Henjun. Can I go now? I'm worried that they've already entered the Starfall Sea. Yun Qingyan looked at her deeply again and nodded. He didn't even need the jade scroll. His sleeves fluttered without wind, and he instantly appeared in the sky beyond heaven. On the highest floating island in the sky beyond heaven, Yun Qingyan stood tall and flicked her fingers. In less than half an hour, a white shadow flashed on the floating island. As soon as Su Junmo appeared, he hurriedly walked in front of her. Master. He bowed respectfully to Yun Qingyan. Chapter 108. Su Junmo had arrived in a hurry, and there was a hint of anxiety on his face. The Starfall Sea was fraught with danger, as expected of a famous brother in the Three Realms. The members of their team were already the cream of the crop among the younger generation of the Three Realms. They had just arrived at the edge of the Starfall Sea, but they had already experienced 2 battles. 2 of their team members had already been injured. Su Junmo had received Yun Qingyan's summons, and did not dare to disobey. He forced himself to suppress his worry and saluted Yun Qingyan respectfully. My lord. Mengqi is now. Yun Qingyan had only spoken a few words when Su Junmo's figure suddenly swayed. The white-robed youth's figure suddenly faded, and became almost transparent. Yun Qingyan raised her sword-like eyebrows and pointed her finger. A faint light sprinkled from the top of Su Junmo's head, completely enveloping his flickering body. However, it only lasted for a moment before Su Junmo disappeared from the floating island. His vision blurred, and before he could explain to his companions, he felt his body shaking violently along with the ground. He could not hold the sky beyond heaven jade slip in his hand, and it rolled to the ground with a gurgle. A wave of heat rose from the bottom of Su Junmo's feet, as if it was going to roast him alive. No, it could no longer be called heat. It was boiling hot, and it was enough to engulf everything within a 1-kilometer radius. The heat wave was accompanied by flames that covered the sky, and it came crashing down on them. Xing, who had been guarding Su Junmo, quickly waved her hands in the air. A cool black wave rose from the ground and enveloped 4 or 5 people around them, barely isolating them from the scorching heat wave. Su Junmo. Xing quickly glanced at him. Are you all right? Yes. Su Junmo's expression was solemn and his right hand trembled slightly. He quickly scanned his surroundings and realized that his bamboo scroll from the heavens beyond heaven was nowhere to be found. Did his lord mention Mengqi just now? This thought flashed through his mind, but Su Junmo quickly threw it to the back of his mind. The earth was still shaking crazily, as if there were thousands of soldiers and horses attacking them from afar. Now was not the time to think about this problem. Su Junmo took a deep breath and flicked his finger. A large green net appeared in the air and blocked the black waves of the Xing, blocking the flames first. Whoosh whoosh. The sword cultivator in the group, Pei Mufeng's junior brother, Su Zijuan, made his move. The long sword flashed in the air with a cold light, and the sword chi cut through the raging waves of fire in front of it. Immediately afterward, there was another whoosh as Qin Xiuma's natal long sword emerged from the crack and rushed forward like a bolt of lightning. A bright red lotus appeared in the sky. Chu Tianfeng formed a seal with his right hand and pointed at his natal magic weapon. Lotus steps. He scolded softly. The red lotus magic weapon spun gently in the air, and lotus flowers fell from the sky one after another, sprinkling directly on the rolling waves of heat. Open! Chu Tianfeng scolded coldly, and his fingers swiped down sharply in the air. The red lotus flowers exploded on the waves of heat. This proud youth from the burning sky palace brazenly met force with force, and directly used his own fire elemental spell to face the fire elemental beast in the Starfall Sea. The red lotus flowers exploded, and the area in front of Su Junmo and the others instantly turned into a sea of fire. Xue Chengxian and Li Che stood on the left and right of Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xiuma. Li Che had joined them after hearing that they were coming to the Starfall Sea. He was from the southern border, and the southern border's medical skills were declining, far inferior to the western border. Xue Chengxian, on the other hand, admired him quite a bit. Li Che was a medical xiu that could be called a genius in all of the 3,000 worlds. Don't look at how refined and handsome he looked. In reality, he was already a 4th-grade great perfection medical xiu, and a Yuanying 3rd realm xiuzha. He and Xue Chengxian exchanged a look. The two had limited offensive spells and raised their hands at the same time. A cool wind spread out with them as the center. The originally scorching hot air seemed to have cooled down. Once the irritating waves of heat left, even Xing sighed in relief. Her hands moved quickly like butterflies, and her slender fingers even left faint afterimages in the air. Black Thunder Arrow. The enormous black wave that had been protecting them suddenly rose slowly. Countless ice arrows slowly burrowed out of the black water. There were even tiny bolts of lightning flashing on the ice arrows, and they looked extremely strange. Su Junmo couldn't help but glance at Xing. He knew that Scarlet Fox's master was a xiuzha from the Black Tortoise clan, but wasn't this a little too powerful? Black Tortoise. Wasn't that one of the most rigid and inflexible heavenly demon royal clans? They could lie there motionless for 1,000 years, and they didn't fight for anything. They were especially good-tempered. At the same time, they didn't interact much with other heavenly demon royal clans. They didn't even interact with the Azure Dragon and Phoenix royal clans. This Black Tortoise mighty one was quite concerned about Xing's Scarlet Fox. Break! Xing shouted softly. Countless ice arrows flashing with tiny bolts of lightning pierced through the air, rushing forward under Chu Tianfeng's red lotus flames. Qin Xiuma's natal longsword was in front of him, and its sword energy illuminated the path of the ice arrows. Su Junmo raised his eyebrows, and his bloodlust was stirred up by his companions. 10 directions. He stretched out his hand and drew a huge cross in the air. As his finger moved, there was even a slight sizzling sound in the air. Slash! Su Junmo shouted, and countless willow leaves, like tiny flying daggers, attacked from all directions. In front of them, sword shadows' hand seals flashed, and killing intent filled the air. Ah! A hoarse scream sounded from the smoke and fire in front of them. The voice sounded like it came from an injured mutated beast, but it also sounded like it came from an old man. It was hoarse, painful, and filled with the unwillingness to die. Su Junmo's heart skipped a beat, but Li Che beside him had already said, "There are cultivators in front?" "There are no cultivators in the Starfall Sea," Qin Xiuma said coldly. His eyes were like cold stars, and they flashed with a cold light. "There are only remnant souls that may have died thousands of years ago, or they may have been devoured by mutated beasts and turned into undying remnant souls." Li Che had already taken a step forward, but he retracted his foot. Save me. Ah! The hoarse voice sounded again amidst the screams. This time, everyone heard it more clearly. It really did sound like a cultivator's voice. Although it was hoarse, dry, and full of pain, it was definitely saying it's him. But Li Che's brows furrowed. Qin Xiuma's finger dropped down decisively from midair. Ah! A long scream came from the front. Li Che's brows furrowed slightly. Before he could say anything, Qin Xiuma's life-bond sword had already pierced through the light and shadow of the hand seals. Half of a huge black beast's head hung on the sword. Just that small half of the beast's head was almost twice the size of Li Che's. Purple blood dripped all the way to the ground, and a puff of black smoke rose when it touched the ground. As Qin Xiuma's sword flew closer and closer, the nauseating smell of blood filled the air. Li Che suddenly closed his mouth and looked up at the sword in midair. Qin Xiuma withdrew his life-bond sword and threw the small half of the beast's head to the ground. The ground seemed to tremble slightly, and from the wound, there was still a nauseating stench of blood flowing out. "Do you understand?" Qin Xiuma looked coldly at Li Che. "Yes." Li Che's face was a bit pale, but he still nodded heavily. "The Sea of Fallen Stars is full of danger. I shouldn't have such unnecessary sympathy." Qin Xiuma's gaze became gentler. He was arrogant and tyrannical. After successfully passing the tribulation to become a nascent soul cultivator, he worked even harder than before. His cultivation really advanced by leaps and bounds. In just over a month, he had already become a third-stage nascent soul cultivator. Even Chu Tianfeng was a bit speechless when he saw this. Qin Xiuma was clearly a cultivator who cultivated both sword and art. He could also cultivate a sword spirit, but in the end, it was not as powerful as a pure sword cultivator. As his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds, the sword spirit also grew at a terrifying speed. After entering the Sea of Fallen Stars, Su Zijuan, who was known as the second most powerful person in the younger generation of the Falling Stars Pavilion, saw Qin Xiuma in action a few times, and always sighed at his own inferiority. He even felt that Qin Xiuma's talent as a sword cultivator did not lose to his Shixiang's. Pei Mufeng, who was publicly recognized as the #1 sword cultivator in the eastern border, and whom the elders in the sect hoped could push the Falling Stars Pavilion to the peak. Qin Xiuma pointed his finger, and his life-bond sword disappeared from the air. When he spoke to Li Che, his tone was very gentle. "No matter." He paused and then said, "You medical cultivators are like this, I know." When he finished speaking, Qin Xiuma's lips even curled up slightly, as if he really did not care about Li Che's actions just now. Chu Tianfeng snorted softly. Of course he knew why Qin Xiuma said that. After all, without these medical cultivators, who were almost pedantic and scrupulous in following their hearts and practicing medicine to help the world, he and Qin Xiuma might have died a long time ago. "What is this?" Si Kongxing walked to the side of the exotic beast's huge head and looked at it curiously. It was only half a head, but it was already huge enough. Her breathing was slightly rough, her cheeks were bright red, and fine beads of sweat appeared on the tip of her nose. The battle just now had consumed a lot of everyone's spirit energy and energy. Su Junmo also walked forward to look at the strange beast's head on the ground. He pondered for a moment and said, "It looks a little like the black extreme fox." Si Kongxing did not understand. "You definitely haven't seen it before. It's a demon beast that went completely extinct in the demon realm thousands of years ago," Su Junmo said. "Do you still remember that they are extremely smart? An ancestor once said that the difference between demon cultivators and demon beasts is whether or not they can cultivate a wisp of divine sense." He stretched out his foot and gently kicked the small half of the huge black extreme fox's head. "And the black extreme fox is the smartest. An ancestor even said that if they were given another 10,000 years, they might really be able to cultivate divine sense and become demon cultivators." Unfortunately, Su Junmo shook his head. Thousands of years ago, an elder of the heavenly demon royal clan obtained a secret technique from somewhere. He said that the blood of the black extreme fox could be used to refine the myriad beast platform. The black extreme fox was slaughtered and its clan was wiped out. "So look." Si Kongxing nodded, not fully understanding. Of course, she was far from Su Junmo's knowledge of the demon realm's secrets and legends. Oh right. After listening to the story, she remembered something else. "You said in a hurry that you were going to sky beyond heaven. Have you finished your business?" As soon as Si Kongxing's voice fell, Chu Tianfeng and the others also looked at him. "Don't mention it." Su Junmo also looked vexed. "I just entered sky beyond heaven, and I was forced out. I didn't have time to do anything." In fact, after entering the Starfall Sea, after experiencing the first two battles, and after this battle, he trusted the people in his team quite a bit. However, this involved his lord, and it was a serious matter. Su Junmo didn't dare to casually tell others. Now that the danger was over, he looked around and waved his finger gently. A wisp of spirit energy rushed out, but the jade slip that fell to the ground didn't react at all. Sigh, Su Junmo sighed softly in his heart. It seemed that it had been destroyed in the battle just now. At least before leaving the Starfall Sea, he couldn't go to sky beyond heaven again. He didn't know what the Lord wanted to tell him just now. Su Junmo frowned slightly. He wasn't even sure if he really heard the words Mengqi. Or was it because he was too worried about Mengqi that he thought he heard the Lord mention Mengqi in that moment of chaos? He shook his head. Since he couldn't be sure for now, he didn't want to think about it. Su Junmo looked around and met the curious gazes of the others. He hesitated for a moment but still said frankly, "This matter is very serious, so I can't tell you for now. I'm sorry." He clasped his hands and apologized to Si Kongxing and the others. "Tisk," Si Kongxing curled her lips. She was very curious, but she didn't really want to pry into other people's secrets. The others had already retracted their gazes. Su Junmo was the demon realm's emissary, and involved the internal affairs of the demon realm. It was indeed inconvenient to mention it to everyone. Rest for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. Qin Xiaoma had already sat cross-legged on the ground, indicating that this matter was over. Then let's move on. The few of them sat or stood, and all began to rest. Li Che simply took out the North Deep pills he had prepared and distributed them to the few of them. Qin Xiaoma didn't take them. He waved his hand. "There's no danger for now, so there's no need to use the pills. Keep them for a rainy day." After he finished speaking, he looked up at the hazy sky. This was only the edge of the Starfall Sea. They had been in there for a day and a night, and every step was bleeding. The team originally had close to 20 people, but in the second battle with the ferocious beasts, 3 people were injured. Qin Xiaoma and the others discussed and made a prompt decision to let the others protect the injured and leave the Starfall Sea. The more people there were in the team, the more difficult it was to take care of the front and back. Qin Xiaoma's gaze swept across the few people in this small open space. He and Chu Tianfeng would definitely come. Mengqi was here, so there was no difference between a mountain of knives, a sea of fire, a dragon's pool, and a tiger's den. They would definitely take her out of the Starfall Sea. Si Kongxing also insisted on staying. Her protective spells were second to none among the few of them. Even Chu Tianfeng, a spell cultivator, admitted defeat. Moreover, this enthusiastic and cheerful girl was quite similar to her good friend Meng Qi when she was stubborn. Qin Xiaoma couldn't help but gently raise the corners of his mouth again. Su Junmo also said that he would never leave, and that he must find Meng Qi. These were all old friends he had known in the Cool Breeze Valley. Qin Xiaoma wasn't surprised that he was willing to take the risk. Su Zijuan said that sooner or later he would enter the Starfall Sea to practice swordsmanship. Moreover, his senior brother was also in the Starfall Sea, so he would treat it as an experience. As for Li Che, Qin Xiaoma had already heard that Meng Qi went to his door in the night and saved him. He guessed that this guy was either moved to the point of wanting to repay Meng Qi with his life, just like them. Or, as he said just now, as a medical cultivator, he couldn't just stand by and watch someone die. After all, the thoughts that Li Che sometimes inadvertently revealed were quite similar to Meng Qi's kind look when he went around picking up injured people. They were both idiots. Both idiotic and crazy. Qin Xiaoma's lips raised again. He closed his eyes, and the spirit energy in his body grew and multiplied endlessly. His spiritual sea was quickly filling up, and his cultivation progress was really rapid. These people were easy to understand. However, what surprised Qin Xiaoma more was Xue Qingxian, this eldest son of the Xue family of the Wind Alliance, who should have a promising future, and was likely to become the new leader of the Wind Alliance, actually entered the Starfall Sea without saying a word. TSK. Actually, it wasn't that he couldn't guess. Qin Xiaoma was born in a large sect in the southern land. He had seen a lot of deception and deception. He had even been seriously injured by the betrayal of his close friend. At this moment, he naturally understood the twists and turns of these sections. In the barrier of the grand competition, there was the profound realm Dr. Lin Yan, who had been respected by all medical cultivators in the 3,000 worlds for tens of thousands of years. This powerful medical cultivator was even recorded in the history of some ancient sword cultivator and spell cultivator sections. She recognized Meng Qi as a friend in front of almost all medical cultivators in the world. It seemed that she had also given Meng Qi some amazing inheritance. It was no exaggeration to say that whoever could get Meng Qi would be the #1 medical cultivator sect in the world. It was even very likely that it could make up for the medical cultivators' regret that there hadn't been a profound realm doctor for tens of thousands of years. A hint of coldness flashed through Qin Xiaoma's heart. The Xue family and the Wind Alliance had a good plan. Unfortunately, he wouldn't let them get what they wanted. He opened his eyes and stood up. With a slight flick of his fingers, his natal longsword appeared beside him. The longsword shone with a cold light, and the sword chi was strict. It circled around the people who were still recovering their spirit energy. It seemed to be protecting everyone, but in fact, it was also somewhat vigilant. Soon they all recovered their spirit energy. Let's go. With a wave of his hand, Qin Xiaoma's natal longsword flew straight ahead. Su Zijuan also waved his hand, and his longsword flew behind everyone. Along the way, they used this method to ensure the safety of the few of them. Qin Xiaoma's group didn't walk slowly. They didn't know if it was because they were particularly lucky, or if it was because they had deterred the surrounding beasts by killing the extreme black fox. In the next 2 hours, they didn't encounter any more beasts. Wow! After walking forward for a while, Xing suddenly exclaimed in a small voice. The view in front of everyone suddenly became clear. After entering the Starfall Sea, they had walked for a full day and a half in the forest. Finally, they left behind them. It was replaced by hills that rose and fell one after another in front of them. Those hills weren't high. From afar, they looked like layers of mountains and rivers. The scenery looked pretty good. The forest in the west is the safest place that our predecessors found after entering the Starfall Sea many times. Xue Qingxian, who had been silent all this time, suddenly reminded them in a deep voice. Everyone be careful. Okay. Xing nodded. Perhaps, as Xue Qingxian had said, there were unknown dangers hidden in the silhouettes of hills in front of them. Qin Xiaoma's natal longsword was still flying in front, but its speed was much slower than before. Su Zijuan simply recalled his natal longsword and let it guard the group. Xing. Su Junmo's expression was solemn. Summon the Blackwater to scout the surroundings. Okay, Xing was not only warm and cheerful, but she was also very obedient when she needed to be obedient. She never caused trouble for anyone, and was very cooperative with the group. She raised her right hand very slowly. The originally flat and hard ground seemed to slowly liquefy and distort. Go. Xing's finger drew a fan shape in front of her. The black water she had summoned immediately burrowed into the ground and surged forward. They stopped and waited for Xing's news. This wasn't the first time they had seen this girl use this method of scouting with black water. Not only was it fast and agile, but it was also very safe. Exploring the surroundings from underground wouldn't even alarm those ferocious and cruel strange beasts. A moment later, Xing suddenly looked up ahead. What's wrong? Su Junmo hurriedly asked. There. Xing confidently raised her finger and pointed at the 3 hills in front of them. There's someone behind them. She tilted her head slightly, and her tone suddenly became excited. And it's a young female cultivator. Is it Mengqi? Chu Tianfeng's eyes lit up, and he rushed to ask. I don't know, Xing said. Let's go and take a look. One day later, at the Falling Cloud Manor on the Great Desolate Island, Mengqi sat cross-legged on a smooth and flat white jade platform. She closed her eyes tightly, and her divine sense entered her body. She stared intently at the embryonic form of the 5-spirit cauldron above her spiritual sea. Originally, it was just a small cauldron that looked like the most crude and simple one. It looked like a small cauldron that was built crookedly like a child playing with mud. However, as time passed, the small cauldron became more and more like it. After a full 24 hours of tempering, it now looked similar to the small cauldron that Mengqi had bought in the Cloud Immortal Pavilion. It had 3 legs, 2 ears, and 5 ancient inscriptions could be faintly seen on it. Mengqi exhaled softly and slowly opened her eyes. Not far in front of her, Yin Qingyan was dressed in a white robe and lazily reclining on a reclining chair. She even held a scroll in her hand. The 3 realms' records of mystic arts and other things were basically bamboo slips and jade slips. They were convenient to carry, recorded more things, and stored more easily. Things like books were already very, very rare. Mengqi did not find it strange that Yin Qingyan was holding a book. He had always liked to read like this. She had also heard him say that some ancient inheritances could not be written into bamboo slips and jade slips. They could only be passed down through brocade and such scrolls. When Mengqi opened her eyes, Yin Qingyan seemed to sense it. He turned slightly to look at her and asked, Has the 5-spirit cauldron completed its foundation building? Still one step away, Mengqi said honestly. Yin Qingyan nodded slightly. Mengqi was thinking seriously. This was the last step of the 5-spirit cauldron's foundation building. Since it was a soul-bonded talisman, it naturally could not be forged like this. It was no different from forging talismans by artifact cultivators. For the soul-bonded talisman to be connected with the cultivator's mind, other than using the spirit sea as the cauldron and spirit energy as the fire to refine it. Finally, it needed to be inscribed with the cultivator's own understanding of the path they cultivated. Mengqi had heard Pei Mufeng say that when his soul-bonded long sword was completed, he had carved a sword character. That was the path he pursued all his life. It was the path of cultivation that he would overcome all obstacles and advance on. For Pei Mufeng, the simpler and purer it was, the more determined it would be. Then what about her? Mengqi closed her eyes again. What should she inscribe? Medicine? No. She first denied herself. This was too broad. She had pursued the great path all her life, but she did not dare to say that she had touched the edge of the path of medicine. Yin Qingyan stood and slowly walked to Mengqi's side. He looked at the blue-robed young girl who was thinking seriously, and knew that the other had reached the most critical moment. He did not want to disturb Mengqi, and did not want to interfere with her finding her own path of medicine. Yin Qingyan thought, and then raised her hand in front of Mengqi. A clear light sprinkled down and enveloped her. He hoped that she would be able to see her true self clearly. Mengqi felt that everything in front of her suddenly became clear, and she suddenly opened her eyes. Chapter 109. The green-robed girl sat cross-legged on the white jade platform, her eyes clear and resolute. In her spiritual sea, wisps of white light slowly rotated around the 5-spirit cauldron. The small cauldron was only one step away from completing its foundation establishment. Meng-Chi would also have her own life-bound magic weapon. She separated a part of her divine sense and controlled the inner core to slowly float above the small cauldron. Wisps of white light hung down from the inner core and slowly enveloped the small cauldron. The bamboo slip that Lin Yan gave her also flew above the small cauldron. A second white light hung down and completely protected the 5-spirit cauldron. The small cauldron floated in the air and slowly rotated. In her spiritual sea, spiritual energy rose and rushed into the belly of the 5-spirit cauldron. Meng-Chi's spiritual sea quickly dried up by half. Her eyes flashed slightly, and she separated a part of her divine sense. The divine sense turned into the shape of a medicine knife, and with a chi-chi-chi sound, she neatly carved the word 7 on the surface of the 5-spirit cauldron. In a flash, an ancient inscription of the word 7 appeared on the side wall of the 5-spirit cauldron. The remaining spiritual energy in her spiritual sea instantly rushed up and enveloped the entire 5-spirit cauldron. With a bang-bang-bang sound, it sounded as if countless sledgehammers were hammering the 5-spirit cauldron. When her spiritual sea dried up, the white light on the small cauldron finally dissipated, revealing a bronze corner of the small cauldron. It's done. Meng-Chi's lips curled up, and her eyebrows and eyes relaxed. She suddenly felt something cold in her mouth, and a small round fruit was stuffed into her mouth. The fingers that stuffed the fruit were warm and dry, and the fingertips touched her soft lips. Meng-Chi subconsciously took a bite, and a refreshing sweetness instantly spread from the tip of her tongue. Her empty spiritual sea suddenly became full again. Meng-Chi. Yin Qingyan stood in front of her in a white robe. He raised his hand and gently pressed his warm palm on Meng-Chi's forehead. Do you remember the fire formation? Yes. She nodded. Engrave it on the cauldron. Can I? Meng-Chi's heart suddenly jumped. That's right. If she could inscribe words on the cauldron, she could naturally inscribe other things on her natal magic treasure. As soon as she finished speaking, she immediately took action without waiting for Yin Qingyan's explanation. His divine sense was nourished by the spiritual energy and became strong again. The white light turned into the shape of a medicine knife and quickly carved on the bottom of the small cauldron. However, this consumed a lot of spiritual qi. Meng-Chi had only finished 1/10 of the painting, and his spirit sea was about to dry up again. Her lips felt warm, and another fruit as sweet as the one before was stuffed into her mouth. The fragrant and slightly cool juice not only made her whole body feel comfortable, but also quickly filled up her spirit sea. In this way, after eating 12 fruits in a row, Meng-Chi's spiritual consciousness made the last stroke on the 5 spirits furnace. The small cauldron trembled slightly, and the spirit sea became dry again. Meng-Chi felt a sweetness in her mouth as another small fruit was stuffed into her mouth. She subconsciously licked her lips, wanting to lick away the sweet juice on her lips. Her soft tongue touched Yin Qingyan's fingertips first, instead of her lips. Calm your mind. Yin Qingyan's tone was somewhat serious, and he sounded very serious. As if he had been scalded, he quickly withdrew his hand and let it hang by his side. The sleeve of his robe fell down, covering his fingers. Yin Qingyan gently bent his fingers twice, and as if unconsciously, his thumb gently brushed against the fingertips that Meng-Chi had accidentally touched. Yes. Meng-Chi quickly held her breath and concentrated on controlling the spiritual energy that had been replenished. The 5 spirits furnace, which had been tempered once again, made a deafening bang-bang sound. The last wisp of spiritual qi was sucked out, and the 5 spirits furnace made a loud bang sound. The white light suddenly exploded, and the sky above the spirit sea became peaceful again. Meng-Chi's inner core flew back to its original position. The bamboo slip that Lin Yan gave her also returned to the inner core, quietly floating in the air. In addition, a small blue cauldron quietly floated in the sky above the spirit sea. On the surface of the cauldron, there was an ancient 7 character that looked very solemn. Below the small cauldron, the dense array patterns almost occupied the entire cauldron wall. It was really the fire array that Meng-Chi had just engraved. Meng-Chi was very happy to see it. She had hesitated before whether she should use the cauldron as her natal magic weapon. In fact, if she had to choose, she would prefer silver needles like Schwetchingschwanz. Now, looking at the 5 spirits furnace floating in the spirit sea, Mengqi was very happy even though it was only at the first realm. She exhaled and opened her eyes. Before Mengqi could react, a small red fruit was delivered to her lips. Huh! Mengqi was stunned. She looked at Yin Qingyan's hand, which was so close to her, and she raised her head slightly. The handsome white-robed man was standing in front of her. He was so close that she could even smell the refreshing and clean scent on his body. Yin Qingyan stuffed the fruit into Mengqi's mouth. Did you succeed? He withdrew his hand, returned to his recliner, and sat down. He also took a fruit and threw it into his mouth. Mengqi hadn't completely come back to her senses. She unconsciously bit into the fruit in her mouth. Even after eating so many of them, they were still as sweet and refreshing as before. They were exceptionally delicious. Most importantly, the speed of spiritual energy recovery was too fast. The Dark North pill was already the fastest pill to recover spiritual energy in the 3,000 worlds. Compared with this fruit, it was too weak. 2 kxs. La Mengqi's spirit sea, which had just dried up, was filled again in the blink of an eye. What was this? She subconsciously followed Yin Qingyan's hand and looked at the small tea table next to the recliner. There was a wooden fruit plate on it, and there was a pile of small and exquisite red fruits. Mengqi's eyes suddenly widened. Phoenix fruit. Yin Qingyan happened to throw another one into his mouth and casually said, Phoenix fruit? Mengqi almost jumped up. What I ate just now was phoenix fruit. Yes, Yin Qingyan said. It tasted good. He picked up a fruit and threw it to Mengqi. Here you go. Mengqi hurriedly reached out and carefully caught it. She directly jumped up from the white jade table. Without even putting on her shoes, she ran to Yin Qingyan in her stockings and put the phoenix fruit back on the fruit plate. Mengqi looked out of the window. They were facing the lush phoenix fruit tree. All the red fruits on the tree had disappeared. Obviously, they had been picked. Don't you like it? Yin Qingyan looked at Mengqi in puzzlement and asked in confusion. Mengqi. She carefully put the phoenix fruit that Yin Qingyan threw to her back on the fruit plate. This phoenix fruit had to be stored in a special container. Otherwise, it would quickly lose its medicinal properties. Mengqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She knew it. How could there be such a powerful spiritual fruit in the world that could replenish a cultivator's spiritual sea in an instant? So it was the phoenix fruit. This thing could save a dying person's life if they ate one, not to mention replenishing their spiritual energy. But this was not to be eaten as a fruit. Not to mention that a phoenix fruit could be auctioned for a sky-high price in the 3,000 worlds. Mengqi really wasn't rich enough to eat phoenix fruit as a fruit for fun. Just this phoenix fruit alone could save many people if it was refined into a pill. It would be a waste of God's gift if she ate it like this. Mengqi pursed her lips. She really didn't mean to blame Yin Qingyan. The entire tree here belonged to her. Yin Qingyan had said that she could pick as much as she wanted, but he didn't say that the phoenix fruit was hers. Even if he really ate all the fruits, it was his right. Mengqi also knew that Yin Qingyan was helping her just now. She just felt a bit of heartache. Just now, he had actually eaten more than 10 phoenix fruits with a ka sound. Oh, she really felt heartache. That was more than 10 nirvana pills. Yin Qingyan stared at the constantly changing expression on the green-robed young girl's face. He looked at Mengqi, sometimes frowning, sometimes feeling heartache. He raised the corner of his lips and opened his hand. A wooden box appeared in his palm. The rest is here. Yin Qingyan handed the wooden box to Mengqi. It's just that the phoenix fruit doesn't bear fruit easily. The next time it ripens will probably be 1,000 years later. Royal Sky Yao had long lifespans. After the cultivators of the 3,000 worlds reached the Dongshu stage, their lifespans could reach 1,000 years. If they could become a Mahayana stage cultivator, it was not impossible for them to live for 3,000 to 5,000 years. Yin Qingyan said, "You have the token of the falling cloud manor. When it ripens next time, you can come and pick it." Thank you, Qinyan's Henjun. Mengqi subconsciously opened the wooden box. Mengqi. The wooden box looked slightly bigger than her hands, but after opening it, it was a completely different world. It almost contained the entire phoenix fruit on the phoenix tree. A phoenix tree took 300 years to bloom, 300 years to bear fruit, and 300 years to ripen the fruit. There were only 1,000 phoenix fruits in 1,000 years. In this box, there were a dazzling array of bright red fruits. There were no less than 1,000 of them. They were really the fruits of the entire phoenix tree. Yin Qingyan actually gave her all of them. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. Mengqi stood in a daze for a moment. Her mouth was a little dry. She slowly closed the lid of the box and murmured, "I." Yin Qingyan raised her hand and stuffed another phoenix fruit into her mouth. "Now you can eat it without worry, right?" Mengqi sobbed she didn't mean that. However, after the phoenix fruit entered her mouth, Mengqi still swallowed it slowly. Her spiritual sea was full now. When the fruit entered her mouth, only the juice was sweet and delicious. It was no different from ordinary fruits. Mengqi swallowed the phoenix fruit with tears in her eyes. Seeing that Yin Qingyan reached out to take it again. "Qingyan's Henjun." She hurriedly stopped her and blurted out, "Don't eat it." With a swoosh, she took out a food box from her storage bag. Mengqi opened the lid of the food box. There were a dazzling array of 6 kinds of fresh fruits in it. They were relatively rare in the 3,000 worlds, but the taste was very good. She carefully put the box on the coffee table beside Yin Qingyan. "Qingyan's Henjun, eat this. These fruits are also very delicious." "Okay." A faint smile flashed across Yin Qingyan's eyes. She really reached out and picked up a small purple fruit. To him, all fresh fruits in the world tasted the same. And the phoenix fruit was the same. Mengqi's box was nothing special. As soon as the purple fruit entered his mouth, he felt that it was fresh, sweet, and sweet. It was actually better than all the spiritual fruits he had eaten before. "Qingyan's Henjun." Mengqi saw his relaxed expression and said, "My 5-spirit cauldron has successfully built its foundation. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun, for your help." She clasped her hands and bowed to the ground obediently. "You're welcome." Yin Qingyan looked at her quietly and pointed at the remaining phoenix fruits on the coffee table. "Since you like them, put them away." "Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun." Mengqi hesitated for a moment, then put away all the phoenix fruits. She made up her mind. Once she left the Starfall Sea, she would refine them all into nirvana pills, and then return 90% to Yin Qingyan. Nirvana pills could also instantly replenish a cultivator's spiritual energy. In addition, they could also revive a severely injured person. Even if it was like Yi Wu, whose spiritual sea was completely shattered. Nirvana pills could temporarily restore a cultivator's spiritual energy to its peak. Although it couldn't repair the damaged spiritual sea, it could at least give them a chance to escape. Even if Yin Qingyan ate it like candy, it would be much more effective than eating the phoenix fruits directly. "Qingyan's Henjun." Mengqi hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Earlier, you said that you would tell me about my good friends after my 5-spirit cauldron successfully built its foundation." She bowed respectfully again. "Qingyan's Henjun, please advise me." Yin Qingyan just picked up another fruit. His eyes flashed slightly. Mengqi was temporarily unable to enter the sky beyond heaven because of the overbearing medicinal properties of the Tsangming powder. He went to the sky beyond heaven to inform Su Junmo and the others so that they didn't have to risk entering the Starfall Sea. He didn't expect that the result would be like that. Yin Qingyan more or less guessed that Su Junmo must have suddenly disappeared because of something urgent. Later, he didn't appear again. Either he hadn't escaped, or the sky beyond heaven jade slip was lost, or even destroyed. He could only tell Mengqi that Su Junmo's life was not in danger for the time being. Yin Qingyan didn't lie to her. Su Junmo was his subordinate. Since he could summon him to the sky beyond heaven, he had a way to know whether he was safe or not. He also told Mengqi that in her current situation, if something really happened to her friends, she wouldn't be able to help. Therefore, he asked Mengqi to build the 5-spirit cauldron's foundation first. Yin Qingyan thought that Mengqi wouldn't believe him. Even if she believed him, she would ask him to the end. He didn't expect the little girl to trust him so much. Meng-Chi nodded obediently at that time, and then began to focus on building the 5-spirit cauldron. Yun Qingyan looked at Meng-Chi, who was standing in front of him, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Obviously, she didn't have any gap with him because of what had happened previously. Before Yun Qingyan could finish his thought, he saw the respectful and polite expression on Meng-Chi's face. He looked at the other party's clear eyes, which were filled with curiosity and expectation. The corners of his lips that had just curled up suddenly froze. Meng-Chi was real. She completely didn't mind what had happened before. Even if she was treated like that by him, she didn't care at all. Did she really not mind? This thought had appeared in his mind countless times in the past few days. He never knew that he could be so conflicted for another person. Every time he felt that Meng-Chi seemed to treat him differently, new evidence would always appear, just like now, telling him that Meng-Chi treated him no differently from others. Su Junmo and the others should have already entered the Starfall Sea. Yun Qingyan said indifferently. Huh. Meng-Chi almost jumped up. They're here. She immediately became anxious. Then where should they be now? Meng-Chi's mind was spinning fast. She didn't notice Yun Qingyan's gaze on her. The Starfall Sea is dangerous. Meng-Chi looked up and looked outside the door. It was daytime, but the stars could still be seen flickering in the sky. They seemed to be constantly reminding Meng-Chi that this was the Starfall Sea. It was a dangerous place in the 3 realms that made people tremble in fear. Countless powerful cultivators had fallen there. It was said that anyone below the spirit severing stage would die if they entered. None of her good friends, starting from Su Junmo, were spirit severing stage cultivators. The most powerful one, Su Junmo, should be at the perfected nascent soul stage now, close to the spirit severing stage. But they still came. Meng-Chi took a deep breath and hammered her head in annoyance. It was all her fault. Why did she go to the heavens beyond heaven to ask them for help? Although Su Junmo had already told her about their plan in the heavens beyond Heaven Tower. But even with external help, entering the Starfall Sea was extremely dangerous, unless they could come to the Falling Cloud Manor on the Great Desolate Island. Qingyanzhenjun. Meng-Chi suddenly turned around, her gaze firm. Her hands hanging by her sides clenched into fists. I'm going to find them. She cupped her hands and bowed to Yun Qingyan. Qingyanzhenjun, please send me away from the Great Desolate Island. The Starfall Sea is dangerous. I know, Meng-Chi said. If you leave the Great Desolate Island, you may not be able to move an inch. Yun Qingyan looked into her eyes and said slowly, in addition to the nether iron, there is also Brahma sand here. It can make your 5-spirit cauldron become a 3rd realm natal magic treasure. He paused. In another month, I can recover 30% of my strength, and I can help you transcend the tribulation and advance to the nascent soul stage. Meng-Chi. So the current Yun Qingyan hadn't even recovered 30% of his strength? Thank you, Qingyanzhenjun. Meng-Chi said firmly. But they came for me. Meng-Chi. Yun Qingyan said. You have to think carefully. They don't need you now. Maybe they will leave if they can't find you in a few days. Meng-Chi was stunned. Then she shook her head firmly. They won't. If they didn't come to the Starfall Sea, then they wouldn't come. But since they came, they would never leave if they couldn't find her. Meng-Chi couldn't be more clear about this. Although there were many misunderstandings with Su Junmo and the others in her previous life, these people weren't bad people. On the contrary, the reason why Meng-Chi came back to life and found so many excuses for herself, and even received a lot of spirit stones, she still couldn't help but save them again. It was because these people were all brave men who valued friendship and righteousness. Come with me. Yun Qingyan glanced at her, then stood up and walked out of the door. Meng-Chi hurriedly followed. After bypassing the lotus pond and turning right from the corridor opposite the room, Yun Qingyan brought Meng-Chi to another courtyard. There were no rooms there, only a deep well in the courtyard. The well water was clear and almost reached the mouth of the well. Meng-Chi stood by the well and looked into the well water. The well water was like a mirror, and there seemed to be stars flickering in it. Yun Qingyan's sleeve brushed over the mouth of the well, and a white light fell from his fingertips. The light and shadow in the well water changed, and the stars disappeared. Suddenly, the appearance of the well water changed. Meng-Chi looked over, and could see the deep forest, and the flying beasts that occasionally flew over the forest. The ferocious beasts looked smaller in the well water, but they still couldn't hide their ferocious aura. In fact, she had already guessed a little, but she still turned to look at Yun Qingyan. This is the sky observation mirror. The white-robed man's tone was indifferent. Not only can you see the situation in the Starfall Sea of the Three Realms, but he looked at Meng-Chi. It can take you directly to the place in the mirror. Yun Qingyan paused. But it's one way, and you can't come back. Once you enter, you can't return to the Falling Cloud Manor. Meng-Chi nodded and stared at the deep well for a moment. Qingyan's Henjun. She turned to look at Yun Qingyan again. How should I check the situation in other places? The image in the well water was always the same place. Meng-Chi counted silently. In such a short time, she had already seen 3 or 4 flying beasts fly over the forest. She couldn't see the situation in the forest, but she thought that it would be even more dangerous in the dark forest where the sunlight couldn't reach. She wondered how her friends were doing now. Yun Qingyan reached out to hold Meng-Chi's hand, and gently stroked her finger over the well water. This way you can adjust the directions of the north, south, east, and west. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjun. Meng-Chi subconsciously struggled and withdrew her hand. I understand. Yun Qingyan looked at her deeply. Take your time. He turned and walked back the way he came. When he was about to walk out of the small courtyard, his footsteps paused. He didn't look back and just said faintly, Meng-Chi, Yiwu was born in the demon realm. The demon realm has its own secrets for refining artifacts. After you're done, you can ask her to help you refine the nether iron. Meng-Chi was startled, but she didn't immediately answer Yun Qingyan. The other party didn't seem to intend to wait for her answer. The white-robed man gradually walked away, and finally disappeared around the corner of the corridor. Meng-Chi withdrew her gaze and focused on the well water. She imitated Yun Qingyan, and gently stroked the well water with her slender fingers. Sure enough, the scene in the well water began to change. To the east of the endless forest was a huge poisonous swamp. It looked far bigger than the famous poisonous swamp in the southern land of the Three Realms. Meng-Chi seemed to be able to see the poisonous gas and miasma on the poisonous swamp through the well water. Not to mention the remnant souls and resentful spirits that had been trapped in it for thousands of years. After being devoured by poisonous insects and beasts, those poisonous insects and beasts must be even more terrifying. Further to the east of the poisonous swamp, there was a small mountain range. Some of the mountain ranges were bare, while others were lush with trees. On the surface, these mountain ranges looked much quieter and safer than the poisonous swamp. But from time to time, Meng-Chi would see a flying beast soaring into the sky from a certain place. Its speed was so fast that it made people feel terrified. She bit by bit and looked over seriously. She also saw several fierce beasts fighting. Even though the scene in the well water had already shrunk, Meng-Chi couldn't hear the earth-shattering sounds of spells fighting. But just by looking at the dust that filled the air and made the sun and moon dim, and the terrifying scene that could almost topple the mountains and overturn the seas, she knew that it was definitely fierce beasts with cultivations far above her that were fighting. No cultivator in the Three Realms knew how big the Starfall Sea was. Meng-Chi saw the sun's shadow in the west during the day, and then she saw the night sky full of bright stars, but she still couldn't see the end. In fact, in the Four Realms, there would occasionally be cultivators who would enter the Starfall Sea to cultivate and gain experience, such as Pei Mufeng. Meng-Chi looked for so long, but she didn't even see the shadow of a single cultivator. She stomped her feet, moved her body, and continued to paddle the well water with her hand. Ah! After another half an hour, Meng-Chi suddenly opened her eyes wide. It was obviously night in other parts of the Starfall Sea. Although she could still see the surroundings clearly in the well water, it was still darker than during the day. Meng-Chi's whole body was about to stick to the well water. She held her breath and looked very carefully. In the well water, the scene now was a hilly area. On one of the bare hills, the light of a formation suddenly rose into the sky, cutting through the mystery and silence of the dark night. In an instant, It also illuminated the black-clothed man standing upright at the top of the hill. Meng-Chi almost blurted out the black-clothed man's name. Ji Wujiang. Chapter 110. A strange look flashed across Meng-Chi's eyes. So Ji Wujiang had also fallen into the starfall sea like him? Under the night sky, the black-robed man stood upright on the peak of the mountain. He was a little far away and separated by water, so Meng-Chi could not see his expression clearly. Even his facial features were not very clear, but in the light of the array, Ji Wujiang's amethyst 8 trigrams disc floated in the air. They had fought side by side in the barrier of the grand competition, so Meng-Chi was very familiar with his appearance. Meng-Chi looked around and saw that there were 6 or 7 black-gray wolves that looked taller than humans on the hillside where Ji Wujiang was. Those wolves lowered their bodies slightly. In the night, their eyes were particularly bright. Even from so far away, she could see the fierce glint in those wolves' eyes. However, they seemed to be afraid of Ji Wujiang's array, so they had not made a move yet. Meng-Chi frowned slightly. Ji Wujiang, was he okay? Ji Wujiang's spiritual energy was very unstable. In a place like the Starfall Sea where danger was everywhere, it was really dangerous. Meng-Chi's eyes suddenly flashed. On the mountain peak, the man standing upright raised his hand, and the array shone brightly. The first to move was Ji Wujiang. Countless shadows rushed out from around him and rushed toward those gray wolves. In an instant, it was as if chaos had engulfed those gray wolves. Meng-Chi looked for a moment again. Ji Wujiang was still standing in the same place. Although she could not see his expression clearly, Meng-Chi could roughly imagine it. He was probably as arrogant as before and did not care about anyone. She sighed in relief. She remembered that in the grand competition's barrier, Ji Wujiang's amethyst 8 trigrams disc flashed very quickly at the most intense moment of the battle. At a glance, she knew that it was the most dangerous moment. Now the amethyst 8 trigrams plate beside him was floating leisurely in the air. The purple light only flickered occasionally. It was obvious that he still had energy to spare. Meng-Chi stared at Ji Wujiang for a while longer. Within the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the 2 gray wolves that besieged Ji Wujiang on the hillside disappeared completely without a sound, as if they had never appeared. She was completely relieved. She memorized the approximate location of Ji Wujiang and continued to look in other directions. In the sky observation mirror, the Starfall Sea seemed to be unobstructed. The dense forest, the bottom of the mountain, the grassland, the lake. If it weren't for the ferocious beasts that appeared from time to time, it would look no different from the Trichiliocosm at night. The only thing that Meng-Chi found strange was that she did not see any other Xiuzha. Even if the Starfall Sea was at the edge, it shouldn't be so calm. She was worried, so she looked even more carefully, afraid that she would miss something. After about half an hour, Meng-Chi's eyes flickered. There was finally some movement in the sky observation mirror. There, the night of the Starfall Sea was illuminated by the burning flames on the ground. In addition to the flames, the sword light was deep and cold. 2 long swords with a sharpness that seemed to be able to cut through everything were moving in the air with a terrifying momentum. Meng-Chi's eyes flashed slightly. She recognized one of the long swords. It was Qin Xiaoma. She slowly exhaled. She had seen Qin Xiaoma use his lifebond long sword many times. He cultivated both sword and method, so it was different from the long swords used by other sword xiao. The hilt of the sword was like flowing water, without a fixed shape. She finally found them. Meng-Chi exhaled. Was that flame Chu Tianfeng? Before she could finish her thought, she saw a red lotus slowly rise. Each petal of the red lotus was like a burning flame, illuminating the black-clothed youth below it. Chu Tianfeng's expression was serious, his thin lips pressed tightly together. He pointed to the sky with one hand, and the red lotus spun in the air, leaving countless red lotus afterimages wherever it passed. Then, all of a sudden, the shadows of the red lotuses exploded in midair and on the ground, burning everything into a sea of flames. Then, a huge black wave wrapped in lightning rose from the ground, protecting Chu Tianfeng inside. Xing. Meng-Chi quickly looked over. The girl in a red robe was standing not far behind Chu Tianfeng. Her hair was blown up by the strong wind, and she was focused on controlling the huge black wave. Besides Xikongxing Shueqingxian, Mengqi was stunned. He really came. She felt a little guilty. She had already destroyed his blood moon, although she wouldn't regret it, right? At this moment, seeing that Shueqingxian actually entered the Starfall Sea because of her, Mengqi felt quite guilty. She pursed her lips and looked behind Shueqingxian. That's Li Che? Why is he here too? Mengqi looked at Li Che, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground. Was he injured? Otherwise, even if he was a medical cultivator, he wouldn't be able to sit cross-legged on the ground in such a fierce battle. So, what exactly were they dealing with? Mengqi looked for a moment, and the light of spells and sword lights flashed, but she still didn't see the enemies of her friends. She knew that her cultivation level wasn't high. If she appeared rashly, not only would she not be of help, but she would also be a hindrance. Therefore, she had to plan carefully before acting. Although the sky observation mirror could completely show her the situation of Xikongxing and the others, it was still a little far away. Mengqi took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. Chu Tianfeng's fire illuminated the surroundings. She didn't see the huge black shadows of the fierce beasts. Mengqi's pupils suddenly shrank. She saw it. They weren't huge fierce beasts. She was too prejudiced. At this time, around Qin Xiaoma and the others were little flying insects that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, but they didn't look very big. Mengqi opened her eyes wide, trying to see clearly. With the cover of the night, these flying insects were completely ignored by her at first. Everywhere Chu Tianfeng's flames burned, a dense mass of black shadows fell to the ground. Only then did Mengqi see them. What exactly were they? In the blink of an eye, the battle had become more and more intense. Chu Tianfeng cast spells one after another, and the fire filled the sky, illuminating the surroundings as bright as day. Bees. Mengqi's expression was solemn. In the fire, a large number of flying insects looked a little like bees. Xikongxing's black wave swept over, protecting all her companions. This was especially true for Li Che, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground. He was enveloped from head to toe by her, and was protected by the black waves. Was he poisoned or injured? If they were flying insects, they were probably poisonous. Countless thoughts flashed through Mengqi's mind. What kind of flying insects were these? She was originally kneeling beside the sky mirror, but after taking a quick look, she got up and ran to Yin Qingyan's room. Qingyan's Henjun. The white-robed man was still lying lazily on the recliner, holding a book in his hand. On the coffee table beside him were the fruits that Mengqi gave him. Yin Qingyan heard the hurried footsteps, but didn't put down the book in her hand. She just asked casually, "What's wrong?" "Qingyan's Henjun," Mengqi quickly said. "In the Starfall Sea, are there any flying insects that look like bees?" She paused and quickly added, "White wings, I can't see the body clearly about." She made a comparison in her mind, spread out her hands and said, "It should be about half the size of my fist. The wingspan should be longer than my finger." What Mengqi saw just now was the sky-covering wings that were illuminated by the light of Chu Tianfeng's fire. But in places where the light of the fire couldn't reach, those wings were like snow under the starlight. Yin Qingyan's gaze turned to her. "White wings? Like bees?" He thought for a moment and then said, "There is one kind." Mengqi's eyes lit up. Yin Qingyan threw down the book in her hand. "Snow-tooth bees poisonous. Once the cold poison enters the body, it can freeze a xiuzha into ice in 15 minutes. Even if they don't die, they can't move at all." Mengqi took a deep breath. Snow-tooth bees. It was actually snow-tooth bees. This poisonous insect had long been extinct in the 3,000 worlds. It was said that the 3 realms didn't exist anymore. She had only seen records of them in books. There were actually snow-tooth bees in the Starfall Sea. Mengqi turned and ran towards the sky observation mirror. There were so many snow-tooth bees. If they weren't careful at Xikongxing and were stung by these snow-tooth bees, she didn't dare to continue thinking. She quickly recalled the records about the snow-tooth bees in her mind. Supposedly, these poisonous insects came from the North Jia of the 3,000 worlds. Thousands of years ago, they were considered a threat in the North Jia. Fortunately, the snow-tooth bees only came out when it snowed. At other times, they were dormant in their nests. Most of the cities in the 3,000 worlds, including some small towns, were guarded by sections. Even though the 4 seasons were like spring, there were basically no disasters like heavy snow, drought, or rain in the cities. So at that time, the snow-tooth bee's injuries were limited. Later, the Mo Xiao poisoned a kind of poisonous bee, and the snow-tooth bees of the Mo world. The offspring they obtained not only had the poison of the snow-tooth bees, but could also be active in all seasons. They could enter Xiaojia cities as though they were in a place without people. Soon, it became a scourge that caused endless suffering in the north. Even though the snow-tooth bees did not reproduce as quickly as normal poisonous bees, they were not weak. More than 10 years later, they not only harmed the people of the North Jia, but also spread to the East and West Jia. When the poison of the snow-tooth bees entered the body, the Xiaojia's life would not be in danger for the time being. However, the limbs, muscles, and internal organs would all be frozen. Their entire body would be like ice and snow. Other than their consciousness, they would be no different from a dead person. It was even more unbearable than death. Also, the poison was very difficult to cure. The common antidote pills in the 3,000 worlds were useless. They could only rely on fire-type healing spells to expel the poison from the body bit by bit. As for the normal citizens, they were even more miserable. Once the poison entered their bodies, they would die within a few hours. Usually they could not wait for treatment. So later, the Xiaojia of the 3,000 worlds and 4 Jia worked together to completely eliminate this scourge. This was recorded in many books. Meng Qi also knew about this. Xue Qingxian and Li Che probably also knew about it. Even Qin Xiaoma and the others should have heard about it. After all, it took 7 years to eliminate the snow-tooth bees. Countless Sword Xiao and Dharma Xiao worked together, and went to every corner of the North Jia to find the nest of the snow-tooth bees. Only then did they completely eliminate them. After thousands of years, the poisonous bees did not appear in the 3,000 worlds. When Meng Qi saw it, she really did not think of it. Moreover, the snow-tooth bees were said to be the size of her finger. Who would have thought that they would become about the size of her palm in the Starfall Sea? That poison, Meng Qi shook her head. She had already returned to the side of the sky observation mirror. Her hands were on both sides of the well. She took a deep breath. The battle was still intense in the sky observation mirror. Spells and sword light were everywhere. It looked like, Meng Qi's eyes narrowed. She suddenly realized that Li Che was not sitting cross-legged on the ground to heal himself. Instead, Xue Qingxian just happened to block her line of sight. In front of Li Che, there was a young man in white lying, Su Junmo. Su Junmo has been poisoned? No wonder I didn't see him just now. Meng Qi reached out to touch her storage bag. Countless thoughts flashed through her mind. Calm down. She took a deep breath. She could not be reckless. Not only would her recklessness not help, but it would also make the situation worse for her friends. Meng Qi's gaze fell on Chu Tianfeng, who was constantly using spells. Fortunately, he was here. The thing these snow-tooth bees were most afraid of was fire. Fire? Yes. Meng Qi reached out to the sky observation mirror. The clear well water was cold, and it made her even calmer. Meng Qi. Yin Qingyan's voice came from the entrance of the courtyard. Have you thought it through? His tone was indifferent. There's no return from the sky observation mirror. Yes. Meng Qi turned to look at him. Her eyes were clear, and her expression was firm. Qingyan's Henjun. Thank you for taking care of me these days. She paused and then took out the wooden box containing the phoenix fruit from her storage bag. She carefully put it on the ground. The phoenix fruit can be used to make the Nirvana Dan. Meng Qi said. Other than being able to bring the dead back to life and protect the Ling energy of the Xiaojia, it can also help the Xiaojia who have gone mad to see their true nature, and ensure that their consciousness is not chaotic. Yin Qingyan stilled. His gaze moved from Meng Qi's face to the wooden box on the ground. Their consciousness is not chaotic? Yes. Meng Qi nodded. The Nirvana Dan is hard to come by, and is mostly used to save the dying. Actually, it can also be used to protect the consciousness of those who have gone mad. She thought for a moment and then quickly said, when a Xiaojia goes mad, most of the Ling energy in their body will split, and their consciousness will be hard to control. Before Meng Qi finished speaking, Yin Qingyan already understood. That day, he had already shown the apparition of the 5 spirits splitting. A Xiujia's Ling energy was made up of the primal energies of the 5 spirits. The consciousness controlled Ling energy and also restrained Ling energy. When the 5 spirits split and were no longer controlled by the consciousness, they would even bite back at the Xiujia's consciousness, causing him to go mad. That day he had been slightly anxious and had drawn too much primal energies of the 5 spirits into his body, causing the Ling energy in his body to split. If it wasn't for Meng Qi's 5 accumulations meditation mantra that had never stopped, then he would have already gone mad. Meng Qi pursed her lips and said, "The Nirvana Dan recipe can be found everywhere in the 3,000 worlds. All medical cultivators above 4th grade can make it. Among the recipes for the Nirvana Dan, only the phoenix fruit is rare. The other ingredients can be bought at Cloud Immortal Pavilion." When she said this, she did not continue. Yin Qingyan was smart and strong, and had always understood her meaning. Meng Qi's gaze swept over Yin Qingyan's face. In the end, she was still reluctant. The white-robed man in front of her was an expert that she wanted to follow for the rest of her life. He was also the only person in this world who had always treated her gently. Not only did he never laugh at her whimsical ideas, he was even willing to accompany her and work with her to realize her bizarre ideas. Meng Qi took a deep breath and said, "I should have served Qing Yan's Henjun, but Xikong Xing and other good friends entered the Starfall Sea because of me. I can't ignore them." Meng Qi retracted her hand and bowed respectfully to Yin Qingyan again. Then she raised her head and smiled brightly at him. Her green robe flashed, and she instantly disappeared into the sky mirror. "Idiot." Yin Qingyan suddenly smirked. Then he flicked his sleeve, and the whole box of phoenix fruits, which would cause everyone to fight over it, was thrown back into the sky mirror. Oh, Meng Qi had just passed through the sky mirror when the wooden box fell straight into her arms. The wooden box didn't fall with much force. It was as if someone gently placed it in her arms instead of throwing it down. "Qing Yan's Henjun," Meng Qi murmured and raised her head to look at the sky. But there was only the night sky and the twinkling stars. She couldn't see the world on the other side of the sky mirror at all. The sky mirror would never return. This was the Starfall Sea. After this farewell, she didn't know when they would meet again. Before Meng Qi finished thinking, her feet had already landed on the ground. She closed her eyes and threw all her reluctance to leave to the back of her mind. She had chosen an excellent position, or perhaps Yin Qingyan had helped her at the last moment. Meng Qi stood on the ground and happened to be beside Xikong Xing. She was also surrounded by the huge black waves. Above her, flames crisscrossed and red lotuses bloomed. It was Chu Tianfeng, who was doing his best to block the snowtooth bees. "Meng Qi!" Xikong Xing suddenly screamed. But just as joy flashed on her face, it instantly turned into horror. "Are you really Meng Qi?" She was still steadily releasing the spell in her hand. The black waves covered the sky and the earth, protecting everyone inside. Xikong Xing's bright eyes were full of vigilance. Not only her, but even Qin Xiaoma, Chu Tianfeng, and the others all looked at Meng Qi. "Meng Qi." Qin Xiaoma's eyes flashed and he frowned slightly. Without batting an eyelid, he took a few steps closer to Xikong Xing. His natal longsword flew back and hovered by his side. The tip of the sword shone with a cold light and pointed directly at Meng Qi. Chu Tianfeng only glanced at her. The black-clothed young man's handsome face looked a little pale under the light of the fire. He was still gritting his teeth and using the spell to expel and burn the snowtooth bees. Xue Qingxian raised his finger and held the medicine knife horizontally in his hand. He silently looked at Meng Qi. Even Su Junmo, who was lying on the ground, and Li Che, who was sitting cross-legged next to him, looked over with solemn eyes. Meng Qi was stunned for a moment. She instantly reacted. Something else must have happened before. She didn't have time to explain. She smiled at Xikong Xing. Xikong Xing seemed to be relieved, but her vigilance didn't lessen much. "Meng Qi." "Meng Qi." Qin Xiaoma suddenly spoke. He quietly looked at Meng Qi and suddenly asked slowly, "Do you know who the little demon lord is?" Meng Qi was stunned. She looked at Qin Xiuma's dark eyes and murmured completely subconsciously, "You." She immediately shut her mouth again. But wasn't the little demon Lord Qin Xiuma? It was just that it wasn't the current him. It was the title that others gave him after he returned to the sect for revenge in his previous life. He massacred his close friends who had betrayed him in the past, and seized the position of sect master by force. Moreover, it was the kind that only dared to call him quietly behind his back. There was no little demon lord in the current trichiliocosm. Demon Lord was the title they gave to the master of the most powerful devil residents in the devil world. Qin Xiuma's lips quickly curled up. He immediately asked, "Meng-Qi, do you know these poisonous bees?" "They're snowtooth bees." Meng-Qi raised her head and looked around. She suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. At this time, she was no longer facing the sky observation mirror, and could see everything around her clearly. Around them, there were countless snow-tooth bees that covered the sky and covered the earth. Renwen. Each of them was about the size of her fist, and their white wings were flapping rapidly. In an instant, Meng-Qi's ears were filled with endless buzzing noises. After Su Junmo was injured, Qin Xiuma vaguely became the leader of this group. Even he recognized Meng-Qi. Si Kongxing instantly cheered. "Meng-Qi, it's really you." "Boo." She raised her hand, and another huge black wave surged to protect everyone in the middle. At the same time she muttered, "Su Junmo is injured. He was stung by these damn snowtooth bees." "Yes." Meng-Qi nodded. She looked back at Su Junmo who was lying on the ground. With a flip of her hand, a silver medicine knife was already in her hand. "Let's deal with the snowtooth bees first." Qin Xiuma's long sword suddenly jumped up and killed a few snowtooth bees that had found a gap in the black wave while they were talking. "Meng-Qi, do you have a way?" Meng-Qi looked up at the sky and said, "I know the fire formation." Si Kongxing cheered. "Fire formation? Is it the legendary most violent fire formation in the three realms?" "Yes." Meng-Qi pursed her lips. The formation she used to refine medicine was a modified version of the fire formation. It was a simplified and miniaturized version of the fire formation that Yin Qingyan taught her to make it easier for her to use. Even the second modified version of the fire formation was far less powerful than the original version of the fire formation. However, Meng-Qi knew how to set up the grand fire formation. Si Kongxing was right. It was dangerous and violent, and the fire formation it summoned could be called the best fire in the three realms. If it was really used to refine medicine, even the cauldron would be burned to ashes. With Meng-Qi's current cultivation, it was very difficult for her to use it. However, she had a soul-tethered talisman. The fire formation was engraved on the five-spirit cauldron. With the help of the five-spirit cauldron, she could take a gamble. She took a deep breath and bent down. The silver medicine knife in her hand moved quickly. In her other hand, she held 3 phoenix fruits. The smooth and small round fruit gradually warmed up in her hands. Yin Qingyan should have guessed what she was going to do, so in the end, he gave the phoenix fruits to her. Thinking of Yin Qingyan, Meng-Qi's heart warmed slightly. However, this was only for a moment. She moved quickly, her blue robe almost turning into an afterimage. Si Kongxing's reaction was also very fast. With a tap of his finger, a ball of lightning wrapped around Meng-Qi. The lightning was like a layer of armor that protected her. There were many of these snow-tooth bees, but they were very poisonous. Individually, they were only as strong as Jindan Xiuzha. It was easy for Si Kongxing to protect Meng-Qi. They had fought side by side for many days, and had formed a tacit understanding. When Si Kongxing split his attention to protect Meng-Qi, Qin Xiuma's long sword suddenly became faster. Other than this, he formed a spell with one hand. His long sword turned into countless sword shadows that charged towards the snow-tooth bees. Chu Tianfeng raised his hand. The fire on the red lotus lit up, and the surrounding fire shot into the sky. In this moment, the entire sky seemed to be lit up. None of them asked why, and they did not ask what Meng-Qi was preparing to do. They seemed to have enough tacit understanding and trust between them. This was true for Meng-Qi, and for the other partners. In this moment, the entire team's defense became even more impenetrable. Chapter 111. Meng Qi didn't want him to take Pei Mufeng's things, but Ji Wujiang still succeeded. After taking the stardust, she still fell into the Starfall Sea. Second, I mainly added some details and psychological descriptions. This focused on the time when Meng Qi found Yin Qingyan's real body, and when she woke up after treating his injuries. I thought about it. I still want Meng Qi to treat Yin Qingyan differently, and I don't want to make the story too complicated, so I'll try to make it as sweet as possible. Third, I changed the reason why Su Zhenmo and the others fell into the Starfall Sea. After explaining here, I still insist that Meng Qi fell into the Starfall Sea. Just her saying, "I'm safe," was not enough to persuade her friends to leave her alone. Unless Yin Qingyan intervened. Yin Qingyan could persuade Su Zhenmo, but she couldn't persuade Chu and Qin. After all, in Chu and Qin's hearts, Meng Qi was a person who would even sacrifice herself to save others. So they naturally thought that Meng Qi didn't want her friends to be in danger. I really can't accept this. You can say that I didn't write it well and didn't lay out the details well. However, I feel that, knowing that a good friend is in danger, knowing that a good friend is a kind and gentle person who loves to save people, thinking that she doesn't want them to be in danger, so she's lying to them about her own safety, knowing that she might not even be able to return. But she still wants to save her, and this is a personal choice. She can't use the power of the sect, and she can't even use her own identity to make her fellow sect members die for Meng Qi. I feel that the entire chain of logic isn't too big of a problem, so I insist on my own opinion on this point. Alright, that's about it. I hope everyone has a good time reading the novel. I also want to thank the little angels for staying by my side. 88 small red packets will be randomly dropped today. The porcelain bottle Meng Qi took out contained the blood he had taken from the Nirvana Hawk when they had just entered the Starfall Sea. As soon as the lid was opened, a strong and pungent smell of blood wafted out from inside. It's the Nirvana Hawk's blood. Li Che, who was standing next to Su Zhenmo, had his eyes lit up. Let me do it. He immediately volunteered. Okay. Meng Qi nodded. Li Che then summoned his natal cauldron. His cultivation and medical skills were both above Meng Qi's, and his natal cauldron had already been refined to the third realm. Meng Qi's porcelain bottle was slightly tilted, and 3 drops of blood were accurately poured into Li Che's natal cauldron. The fishy smell instantly became stronger, as if it also carried a wave of hostility and heat, making people want to vomit. Si Kongxing, who was originally following her to watch the show, quickly took 2 steps back and covered her mouth and nose with her sleeves. Meng Qi, this stinks. Meng Qi nodded. The Nirvana Hawk's blood already had a strong fishy smell, and the Nirvana Hawk's blood also had a bit of explosive hostility, making it even more unpleasant. Even Chu Tianfeng, Qin Xiaoma, and Su Zijuan, sword cultivators and spell cultivators who had seen many bloody scenes, took a few steps back subconsciously to avoid the smell of blood that assaulted their noses. Meng Qi and Li Che, however, had no intention of avoiding it, and even Xue Qingxian surrounded them. What a strong smell of blood, and there's also a trace of hostility. He frowned. This is not ordinary Nirvana Hawk's blood. Yes. Meng Qi nodded and didn't explain much. Xue Qingxian glanced at her, and cleverly didn't continue to ask. Li Che originally looked more like a refined and handsome scholar, but at this moment, his eyes were sparkling, revealing a rare fanatical side of him. He stretched out his hand and flicked his life cauldron, sending out spiritual energy, and the light enveloped the entire cauldron, and the 3 drops of Nirvana Hawk's blood suddenly bounced wildly. Li Che was calm, continuously sending spiritual energy into the life cauldron, and the life cauldron finally simply spun quickly in the air. Meng Qi and Xue Qingxian watched with unblinking eyes. Songlang Academy's alchemy was quite famous in the 3,000 worlds. Every year, they used medicine in the southern land to treat ordinary residents injured by miasma and miasma. It was said that sometimes 2 or 3 ordinary elixirs could be put to good use after passing through their hands, which was quite extraordinary. Li Che was the most outstanding disciple of the younger generation of Songlang Academy, and also the most valued disciple of his master, the head of Songlang Academy. He had already learned all the teachings of his master in alchemy. His life cauldron was also not an ordinary item. It spun madly in the air dozens of times, and then stopped. It seems. Xing, who was standing not far behind Meng Qi, suddenly tilted his head. It doesn't smell so bad anymore. Li Chei's life cauldron fell, and the 3 drops of blood had already turned into a red blood bead the size of a little finger's knuckle. Meng Qi reached out and picked it up. The bead was crystal clear and exquisite, and the strong smell just now had completely disappeared. She smiled at Li Chei. His skill in refining elixirs was above hers. Even Xue Qingxian couldn't help but look at Li Chei a few more times. Meng Qi picked up the blood bead formed by the Nirvana Hawk's blood and walked in front of Su Junmo. She took out a lotus pod from her storage bag and took out 2 lotus seeds. This is... Without seeing the appearance of the flower, Xue Qingxian and Li Chei couldn't recognize the origin of this thing just by looking at the lotus pod. Purple lotus, Meng Qi said. This time, even Xue Qingxian sucked in a breath of cold air. Purple lotus? Heavens! Li Chei stared at the 2 purple lotus seeds in Meng Qi's palm and was extremely surprised. The legendary purple lotus that can cure all fire and heat poisons. Yes, Meng Qi nodded. The Nirvana Hawk's blood was too overbearing, and there was no other suitable medicine in the Starfall Sea for the time being. She peeled off one of the lotus seeds and crushed it together with the blood bead. Meng Qi's fingertips flashed, and she quickly pressed them on the side of Su Junmo's neck that was stung by the snow-tooth bee. Su Junmo sat cross-legged on the ground, and these 2 extremely cold and extremely hot treasures of heaven and earth instantly entered his body. He couldn't help but groan, and his body swayed back and forth. Meng Qi had already sat cross-legged opposite him. Her fingertips flashed faintly, and she sent the medicinal qi into Su Junmo's body. In her other hand, she was still holding the other lotus seed of the purple lotus. Su Junmo's face became extremely pale, and then instantly flushed red. This repeated many times. The thin layer of frost on his hair suddenly melted, and then suddenly froze, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Meng Qi closed her eyes. She could clearly feel that since that day when she used the 5 accumulations meditation mantra to restrain Yin Qingyan's spiritual energy, not only did her medical skills improve, but she also seemed to be more proficient in using other medical skills. She had the blood of the Nirvana Hawk, and now she was only using the most basic clear wind mantra to detoxify Su Junmo. The clear breeze technique could be considered one of the simplest and most basic medical techniques in the world of medicine. There were roughly as many medical cultivators in the entire Trichiliacosm who knew the clear wind mantra. However, at this time, the 5 spirits cauldron above Meng Qi's spiritual sea was still constantly pouring spiritual energy snowflakes into her spiritual sea. As the spiritual energy snowflakes fell, the thin ice on the surface of her spiritual sea melted and quickly froze. At this time, when she used the clear wind mantra, the spiritual energy flowing in her meridians seemed to carry a bit of coldness. The coldness was different from the feeling of being poisoned. It didn't make Meng Qi feel uncomfortable, but it made her see her nature clearly. Her divine sense seemed to be able to clearly feel the flow of spiritual energy every time she used the mantra. Meng Qi had a feeling that if she kept using the mantra in this state, the speed of her mantra improvement would be faster. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it would be twice the result with half the effort. Meng Qi pursed her lips and felt every trace of spiritual energy flow more attentively. The 5 spirits cauldron seemed to realize that its master understood its use, and gently swayed above her spiritual sea, like a child asking for praise. The Starfall Sea was quiet. Qin Xiaoma and Su Zijuan were still fully alert to the situation around them. Xing stood behind Meng Qi, and the index and middle fingers of his right hand were close together, ready to summon a huge wave to protect everyone at any time. Chu Tianfeng crossed his arms in front of his chest. He looked at Meng Qi, and then at Su Junmo. Under the starlight, his eyes seemed to be flickering slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Xue Qingxian and Li Chei stood beside Meng Qi. Neither of them made a sound, and they watched this scene silently. They were prepared. If Meng Qi couldn't hold on, they could take over at any time. Li Chei stared at Su Junmo's red and white face for a moment, and then his eyes slowly moved up the slender fingers on the side of his neck, and finally fell on Meng Qi's face. He only glanced at it once, and then quickly turned his eyes away. See no evil. He knew that he shouldn't stare at a female cultivator like this. But it was very strange. Li Che frowned slightly. Ever since Meng Qi saw through Ji Wujiang's trick in the inn in descending Star City and saved him. He would always see this elegant girl in a green robe with a faint expression in his dreams. Sometimes, even during the day, some incoherent and even strange images would suddenly flash through his mind. In every image, there would be the figure of fellow Taoist Meng. Li Che's face was slightly hot. He shouldn't have any improper thoughts about Meng Qi. It was good that they first met. Later, when they met again in the apricot forest, he saw her outstanding performance in the barrier of the competition. Li Che admired her. That day, when the apricot forest traditional Chinese medicine cultivators were excited, the blood in his chest was also burning, and he was worried about Meng Qi. But that shouldn't be the kind of thing that would flash through his mind occasionally when he was distracted during the day. Li Che's face was burning more and more. He didn't have a Dao companion yet, but occasionally he would hear his senior brothers and sisters or the seniors in the sect mention that if he had a Dao companion to cultivate with, he wouldn't be too lonely on the great Dao. Li Che had also thought that he might find a like-minded Dao companion in the future, to accompany and encourage each other, and walk down this great Dao step by step. No one had taught him how to choose a Dao companion. But that day outside descending Star City, when Lu Qing risked her life to save him, Li Che's heart beat so fast for the first time in his life for something other than medical skills. He knew that he would never be able to forget that beautiful and brave silhouette. So later on, he often dreamed of Meng Qi, and the person he saw in his daydreams was also her. This was really. Li Che reached out and scratched his head. He really couldn't figure it out. He really didn't have any improper thoughts about this fellow Taoist Meng Qi. He could swear in the name of the medical ancestor. Li Che's heart was a little messy. Later on, he heard that Meng Qi fell into the Starfall Sea. Remembering that she saved his life, he volunteered to follow her into the Starfall Sea. Lebeek. Net at this time he saw Meng Qi again. The girl was wearing a green robe and had black hair. She should have been waiting for them to save her, but she was like a divine soldier descending from the sky. She was even so calm, no different from what he saw in the barrier of the competition. Li Che sighed softly. His heart wouldn't beat so fast when he looked at Meng Qi. Why would he dream of her? Just now, when he stared at her in a hurry, it seemed that several images of her flashed through his mind. They had clearly only met a few times. The first time they met, he was poisoned, so he couldn't see anything. But Li Che smiled bitterly. Even he didn't understand. Just as his thoughts were in a mess, Meng Qi withdrew her hand. She opened her eyes and looked at Su Junmo sitting opposite her. The white-robed man's forehead was slowly dripping with sweat, and his face was no longer as pale as before. After a while, he exhaled a cloud of white mist and slowly opened his eyes. How do you feel? Meng Qi asked as she reached out and pressed Su Junmo's wrist. Before her fingers touched him, the white-robed man suddenly withdrew his hand and avoided Meng Qi's fingers. Meng Qi raised her eyebrows. Su Junmo hurriedly glanced at her and quickly turned his head away, not daring to look into Meng Qi's clear eyes that were full of doubts. His voice was dry and hoarse, sounding particularly awkward. I'm fine. Su Junmo took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, I'm fine. The poison is cured. The ardent eagle's blood is indeed powerful. As he spoke, he closed his eyes and shook his head heavily. Meng Qi stood up. It wouldn't hurt to let her feel his pulse. Su Junmo was still sitting cross-legged on the ground. He seemed to be in a dilemma and was struggling desperately in his heart. He remained in that position for a long time without moving. Even Si Kongxing couldn't stand it anymore and walked over to Su Junmo. She bent down and almost touched his face. Su Junmo, are you okay? I'm fine. Su Junmo murmured. He sat for a while and finally stood up. Qin Xiaoma slowly walked to Chu Tianfeng's side and raised his chin at the obviously awkward white-robed man. The black-robed youth understood and stared at Su Junmo. I'm fine. Su Junmo took a deep breath again. He bowed to the crowd. It's my fault for making everyone worry. Su Junmo looked up and quickly glanced at Meng Qi. he said. Mengqi. Qi. He almost squeezed out the two words qi, with great difficulty. Thank you for saving me. He said these words very quickly. Su Junmo paused and suddenly remembered something. He quickly took out a brocade pouch from his storage pouch and stuffed it into Mengqi's hands. I know your rules. The spirit stone's here. Chapter 112. Mengqi. The cyan brocade pouch was light in her hand, and it was embroidered with an exquisite flower pattern. Mengqi subconsciously sent a bit of spirit energy into the brocade pouch. Then she couldn't help but gasp. Su Junmo. There were 900 Xian spirit stones in the brocade pouch. Mengqi had extorted 2,000 Xian spirit stones from the Shui family, including the ones she had spent on the barrier earlier. She still had more than 1,900 stones left. The cultivators in the 3,000 worlds mostly used ordinary spirit stones. Unless it was at an auction like the heavenly auction house in the sky beyond heaven, it was rare to see them. 900 Xian spirit stones was not a small number in any sect in the 3,000 worlds. Even large sects like the Wind Alliance, the Shui family, or the Burning Sky Palace would not take it lightly. Su Junmo. Mengqi threw the brocade pouch back to him. It's not calculated like that. She paused and explained. You came to save me, and I'm also the reason why you were poisoned. But, Su Junmo frowned. Mengqi waved her hand at him and continued. Even if you didn't come for me, if we came together to explore the Starfall Sea, no matter who was injured, others would not stand by and do nothing. If we could save you, we would naturally save you. Su Junmo. He understood what Mengqi was saying, but it was not calculated like that. He held the brocade pouch and slowly lowered his hand, holding it tightly. This was no longer about spirit stones. Su Junmo looked at Mengqi. The girl in cyan robes was still calm, and her eyes were clear and firm as she focused on the situation around her. She always knew what she was doing and what she wanted. Su Junmo thought vaguely. He suddenly lowered his head and looked at the brocade pouch in his hand, and the corners of his lips rose quickly. Mengqi. Su Junmo strode toward Mengqi. Mengqi turned to look at him. Just take it. Su Junmo stretched out his hand and forcefully shoved the brocade pouch into Mengqi's hands. He held Mengqi's hand in his palm. Her skin was delicate, and her fingertips were slightly cold. There seemed to be a faint medicinal fragrance. It was clearly so small and soft, as if it had no bones. Su Junmo's heart skipped a beat, but as if he had been scalded, he suddenly let go of her hand. Take it, take it. He waved his hand. I don't lack spirit stones. Mengqi. I feel like I've been hurt. Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xioma looked at each other again, and saw the same message in each other's eyes. Is this really another one? Even Su Junmo. Crash. How many people had Mengqi picked up? Mengqi. Qin Xioma suddenly raised his chin at Mengqi. Take it. Su Junmo has more spirit stones than he can spend. Yes, Mengqi. Chu Tianfeng immediately followed up. Does fierce eagle blood cost money? That purple lotus doesn't need spirit stones? Take it, take it. You can even use it to buy medicine. Mengqi. Shui Qingxian also smiled. Just take it. He paused and said, the 12 medical cultivation sects, including the Medical Cultivation Spell Union, all have a clear rule that medical cultivators should treat the injured and sick not for money, but also should not completely sacrifice themselves. Yes. Li Che also nodded. Our Surging Waves Academy usually accepts spirit stones. Mengqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She didn't say that they shouldn't accept it, but these people probably didn't know that there were a total of 900 spirit stones in this brocade pouch. Including in her previous life, Mengqi didn't accept spirit stones or remuneration when she saved people. It was just that sometimes it was very special. Occasionally, when she met people who were seriously injured, they would already be unconscious. For example, when Mengqi picked up Su Junmo in her previous life, the talkative fox couldn't even maintain his human form, and had reverted to his original form. He was lying on the decaying leaves in the dark forest, dying. If it wasn't for the warmth in his chest, and his instinct as a heavenly demon noble allowed him to protect his heart meridians and spiritual sea, he would have died long ago. In the beginning, for at least 10 days, Su Junmo, who had reverted to his original form as a white fox, couldn't even open his eyes. Other than the faint breathing from his nose and his still beating heart, he was no different from a dead person. When Meng Qi finally pulled him back from the gates of hell, Su Junmo took 2 more breaths and started talking. She couldn't interrupt at all. At that time, Meng Qi only felt that there were 1,000 bees buzzing in her ears every day. Even when she fell asleep at night, she dreamed that she had fallen into a huge beehive. Thousands of bees were buzzing around her and trying to drill into her ears. Her only thought at that time was to quickly cure Su Junmo and never see him again in this life. Therefore, on the night that Su Junmo was cured, Meng Qi immediately packed up her things and ran to another city hundreds of miles away. She found the largest and most luxurious inn with a hot spring and comfortably soaked in the hot spring. She slept for 12 hours in one go. How could getting paid be more important than getting rid of the talkative fox? She had completely forgotten. Meng Qi was immersed in her memories when Xue Chengxian slowly walked to her side and said gently, "The 12 medical cultivation sects and the Medical Cultivation Assembly Alliance have their own rules. Do you know?" Meng Qi raised her eyebrows. This time, even Li Che couldn't help but laugh. Meng Qi. They could be considered as partners who had fought side by side and gone through fire and water together. Li Che heard everyone call her that and followed suit. Even I know. Anyway, they were still resting and had just wiped out the snowtooth bees. Everyone was in a good mood. Xue Chengxian looked up at the night sky of the Starfall Sea, and then looked down at Meng Qi. The starlight here was much brighter than in the 3,000 worlds. The starlight fell on Meng Qi's elegant face. Even her long eyelashes seemed to be dyed with a faint layer of starlight. Her eyes were bright and clear as if they were filled with small stars. Xue Chengxian looked at the confusion in Meng Qi's eyes and couldn't help but laugh again. The Starfall Sea was indeed dangerous, but there was no Wind Alliance, no Xue family, and no sect or family here. There was only a group of pure and brave companions. Xue Chengxian raised the corner of his lips. In this place known as the most dangerous place in the 3,000 worlds, after just experiencing a battle, he actually felt unprecedentedly relaxed. If medical cultivators treat ordinary people or cultivators, the other party can't afford to pay. Xue Chengxian said, they can go to the Medical Cultivator Conference Alliance to get part of the payment, but they must record the treatment and give it to the alliance. I see. Meng Qi nodded thoughtfully. In fact, the Medical Cultivator Conference Alliance did a lot for the medical cultivators in the 3,000 worlds. Xue Chengxian looked at her with a smile. So even if you don't take these spirit stones, you can go to the alliance to get them after leaving the Starfall Sea. The snowtooth bees are relatively rare, and the fierce eagle blood. And this is the Nirvana fierce eagle blood. There should be a lot of spirit stones. He thought for a moment and said, there should be at least 3 to 500 ninth grade spirit stones. Hearing this, Li Che scratched his head in embarrassment and said, I also went to the alliance to get spirit stones. Meng Qi nodded. She picked up the brocade pouch and glanced at Su Junmo. Meng Qi counted and took out 20 Xian spirit stones and returned the rest to him. These are enough. As she spoke, she put the 20 Xian spirit stones back into the brocade pouch. Su Junmo took the brocade pouch and looked at it. He was speechless. Was his life so worthless? This was not just for the snowtooth bees, but more for... Su Junmo opened his mouth, but said nothing in the end. He coughed lightly and looked around. He said in a low voice, there were dangers at every step in the Starfall Sea. I was too careless. He paused, as if he was explaining to Meng Qi, and continued. Not long after we passed through the forest, we encountered an injured cultivator. Meng Qi nodded. It was not strange to encounter injured cultivators in the Starfall Sea, but that was not a real cultivator, but an illusion. Su Junmo hesitated and said, illusion? Meng Qi asked. Yes. Su Junmo nodded and continued. The snowtooth bees are used to confuse people with illusions. What we saw was a young female cultivator lying on the ground. She seemed to be injured and was asking us for help. Wait! Meng Qi keenly grasped the crux of Su Junmo's words. You mean, all of you saw the same illusion? Yes. Su Junmo's face suddenly turned red for some reason. He looked away and nodded lightly. Meng Qi nodded. She lowered her eyes and thought seriously. Was it poison? Or was it some kind of illusion spell? Or an array? When Meng Qi thought of this, she looked at Chu Tianfeng. The black-clothed youth raised his eyebrows. From the time Meng Qi appeared until now, he had not said a word to her. It was not a spell. Chu Tianfeng said firmly, guessing what the other party wanted to ask. We were not poisoned either. Xue Qingxian continued. Meng Qi tilted her head and glanced at him, then nodded silently. If it was neither, it could be a magic treasure or an array. She looked into the distance and looked around. The night still shrouded the earth, and the stars in the sky were far brighter than the 3,000 worlds. The starlight was so dense that it seemed to have substance. Meng Qi even felt that she could see the flow of spiritual energy under the night sky. The cultivators of the 3,000 worlds had to use cultivation techniques to turn the spiritual energy into their own. Su Junmo and Si Gongxing were different. When they breathed in and out, the spiritual energy contained in the starlight would naturally be turned into their own by the star array that they were born with. This should be the most suitable place for Yao cultivators to cultivate. Similarly, it was also very suitable for rare birds and strange beasts. They were not comparable to heavenly demons, but in this starfall sea, they could also cultivate with twice the result with half the effort. So, was that illusion a new attack method that the snowtooth bees had learned in the starfall sea for thousands of years? Meng Qi's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly separated a part of her divine sense to explore her spiritual sea. Just a moment ago, she suddenly found that the 5-spirit cauldron above her spiritual sea had a new change. Originally, the 5-spirit cauldron was only constantly turning the spiritual energy on Meng Qi's inner core into snowflakes, which was equivalent to making the spiritual energy purer. Now the 5-spirit cauldron suddenly swayed gently above her spiritual sea. There was a thin layer of ice on the surface of Meng Qi's spiritual sea. As the 5-spirit cauldron swayed, the snowflakes began to fall in a regular pattern. It seemed to be using these spiritual energy snowflakes to draw on the thin ice of her spiritual sea. In just a moment, a complete and simple pattern was drawn on the thin ice. It was a new array. In the blink of an eye, Meng Qi remembered all the arrays. Was it an illusion array? Meng Qi thoughtfully stretched out her finger and quickly drew the array in the air. If Yin Qingyan was here, she would definitely recognize what this was. She thought subconsciously. Then Meng Qi instantly realized that she had already left the great desolate island through the sky observation mirror. The sky observation mirror had never returned. Although Yin Qingyan and she were still in the Starfall Sea, they were now in different parts of the world. Meng Qi's eyes dimmed slightly, but under the cover of the night, no one noticed the change in her expression. Meng Qiqi. Su Junmo was the one who knew the arrays the best among these people. However, ever since he was cured of the poison, every time he called Meng Qi, it seemed particularly awkward. He always wanted to say something but hesitated. Have you thought of something? Su Junmo glanced at Meng Qi and asked carefully. It might be a kind of illusion array, Meng Qi said. The creatures in the Starfall Sea are different from those in the 3 realms. They have become stronger. Oh. Su Junmo immediately nodded. If it was an illusion array, everyone here's understanding of arrays added together probably couldn't compare to a strand of Meng Qi's hair. After all, she was taught by a famous teacher. Even if all the cultivators in the 3 realms were counted, the person who taught her could be called the #1 array master in the world. Su Junmo pondered for a moment and continued. That illusion array is very magical. It will automatically choose the strongest among us. Su Junmo, you have already advanced to the spirit severing stage. Chu Tianfeng suddenly interrupted and said, so what we saw at that time was the injured Lu Qingran. Su Junmo's face immediately turned red. He didn't refute Chu Tianfeng first. Instead, he carefully glanced at Meng Qi. Meng Qi's expression was as usual. The 3 words Lu Qingran didn't make her expression change. Su Junmo secretly sighed in relief. Si Kongxing frowned and suddenly said, Su Junmo, why do you seem to? She asked. You seem to be very afraid of Mengqi? In the time it took to say these few words, Su Junmo secretly glanced at Mengqi a few times with that kind of gaze. Si Kongxing was the most familiar with the two of them. The three of them had traveled together for a long time. Su Junmo usually treated them quite well. In any case, he would never look at Mengqi and herself like that. What nonsense are you talking about? Su Junmo waved his hand. He coughed twice and quickly said, Mengqi, don't listen to her nonsense. I didn't do anything wrong. Why would I be afraid of you? Ha 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 ha. You sound like you're trying to hide 300 taels of silver here. Si Kongxing snorted twice and said, Xing. Mengqi shook her head at Si Kongxing and explained, Lu Qingran and I were both disciples of Cool Breeze Valley. She was also my senior sister. Our relationship was ordinary, and there were some misunderstandings. As she spoke, she looked at Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xiaomao again and continued, but it's all in the past. Mengqi. Si Kongxing reached out and took her arm. She was too lazy to wait for Su Junmo to be so careful. She explained hesitantly and said in one breath, That day, we all saw the injured Lu Qingran lying on the ground. When she saw us approaching, she even asked us for help. Because we had seen her once in Descending Star City, no one suspected anything. Here. Si Kongxing raised her chin at Li Che. This Li Che also said that Lu Qingran had saved him before. She was a kind and brave girl, and he wanted to save her. We ran to save her. In the end, there were no injured cultivators. She snorted softly. When we arrived here, that Lu Qingran suddenly exploded and turned into a lot of snow-toothed bees. Su Junmo was walking at the front, and was stung by the snow-toothed bees. Si Kongxing was eloquent and straightforward. You know what happened after that? As she spoke, she shivered with lingering fear. She raised her head and looked at the quiet night sky. It was so scary. Just the buzzing sound alone gave me a headache and made me want to vomit. Mengqi nodded. Su Junmo's face was even redder than before. He did not interrupt Si Kongxing and carefully glanced at Mengqi again. The green-robed girl's expression was still calm. She looked the same as before. Previously, when he saw Mengqi descending from the sky like a divine soldier, Su Junmo was full of questions to ask her. The Heavenly Master suddenly summoned him to the heavens beyond heaven because he mentioned Mengqi. Was she with the Heavenly Master before? Now Su Junmo did not want to ask anything. He did not dare to ask anything. He did not mention what happened that day anymore. He could only secretly rejoice that he had bet on the right treasure. Su Junmo's gaze quickly swept across Mengqi's face. Of course, if it was her, even if her cultivation was a little lower, he would be convinced to be the Taoist companion of the Heavenly Master. In the future, if there were any obstacles between the two of them, he would be willing to be a pawn to pave the way for them. Even if he died, he would have no regrets. Since everyone has rested enough, Xue Chengxian looked at Su Junmo and then at Mengqi. He felt that there was something strange between the two of them. It did not seem like an ambiguous relationship. It was just a little strange. Then, are we going to go back the way we came? Xue Chengxian asked. The place where the snowtooth bees live. Li Che pursed his lips and said, There must be snowtooth honey. Mengqi and he looked at each other. Now it seems that we've killed all the snowtooth bees. Is that snowtooth honey? Li Che's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. The meaning of his words could not be clearer. The snowtooth bees were not very good at making honey. The snowtooth bees in the 3,000 worlds also built nests. In a huge hive, there was often only a small bottle of snowtooth honey after 100 years. The snowtooth honey was extremely rare. Many pill formulas required the addition of ordinary spirit bees' honey to neutralize the medicinal properties. If the snowtooth honey was used instead, not only could it neutralize the medicinal properties, but it could also double the medicinal effects. They wanted it. Mengqi and Li Che looked at each other again. They saw the desire for the snowtooth honey in each other's eyes. She quickly looked around and said decisively, The hive of the snowtooth bees is nearby. They won't be too far away from the hive. Now that the snowtooth bees have been killed, there shouldn't be any danger in the hive. Yes. Li Chei's eyes lit up. His face was full of yearning. With this as the center, we'll search the surrounding 300 feet. Meng Qi said. If there's nothing, we'll go back the way we came. She looked at Su Junmo and then at Xue Qingxian. She asked, is that okay? Yes. Su Junmo had no principles in front of Meng Qi. He nodded repeatedly. We can't go back empty-handed. Xue Qingxian smiled and nodded. Meng Qi's request was not too much. It was only 300 feet. If there was any danger, they should have encountered it by now. Okay, he said. We can't go back empty-handed. Don't split up. Qin Xiaoma walked over. 2 people in a group. We'll search quickly and leave. Okay. Meng Qi nodded repeatedly and agreed obediently. Meng Qi, you and I will be in a group. Qin Xiaoma raised his chin at her, turned around and walked toward the south. Meng Qi shrugged. She comforted Si Kongxing and quickly followed him. After working together for the past few days, they had a tacit understanding. The rest of the people quickly formed groups of 2 and walked in the other 3 directions. Qin Xiaoma did not walk fast. Meng Qi quickly caught up with him and walked side by side. He walked a distance away and turned around to look behind him. Meng Qi. Qin Xiaoma lowered his voice. Just now. He paused and flicked his fingers. His natal longsword moved and stopped beside him with a whoosh. The tip of the sword shone with cold light. It was extremely sharp. Qin Xiaoma closed his eyes and said in a low voice, I saved your life. You've already paid the spirit stones. Meng Qi interrupted him. She turned to look at Qin Xiaoma. He was also looking at her. The little devil king, who would make the entire southern land change their faces when talking about him in the future, had deep facial features. Under the starlight, the man in black looked handsome and mysterious. His eyes were even brighter than the stars. Qin Xiaoma raised the corner of his mouth and said in a lazy tone, Fine. Sometimes he spoke like Ji Wujiong with a hint of mockery. However, he was far less harsh and arrogant, as if he didn't care about anyone in the world. If you don't want to mention it, then don't mention it. In any case, mentioning it will only make us ashamed and look like clowns. Qin Xiaoma's words were a bit harsh. Meng Qi was stunned. She heard him say again, Chu Tianfeng is a fool. I'm afraid he still hasn't guessed. He lowered his voice and said softly, You also. Before he finished speaking, a whoosh sound suddenly came from not far away. Meng Qi looked up and saw a firework with a long tail rushing into the sky under the night sky. The firework exploded in midair, and a clear, one character appeared in the night sky. Then, it quickly turned into little bits of spiritual aura and scattered in all directions, disappearing without a trace. It's Big Sister Xue. Meng Qi blurted out. We found it. At the same time, not far behind them, cheers came from the Sikongxing. It's Big Sister Xue Jinwen, Meng Qi quickly repeated. She turned around and rushed in the direction of the Sikongxing. Qin Xiaoma seemed to want to say something, but in the end he closed his mouth. He quickly followed, and the group quickly gathered around the Sikongxing. She stood side by side with Su Junmo, and handed the porcelain bottle in her hand to Meng Qi. The snowy tooth honey is all in here. We'll split it equally. Meng Qi did not take the porcelain bottle. He waved his hand and said, We'll split it after we get out. She then said, Did you see it just now? That communication firework was from Big Sister Xue Jinwen. Third sister? Xue Qingxian frowned slightly. Are you sure? I'm sure. Meng Qi nodded firmly, and took out the same communication firework from his storage bag. Big Sister Xue gave this to me when we went to the Immortal Cloud Pavilion. Xue Qingxian reached out and took the firework. He held it in his hand and looked at it carefully. But this time, third sister said that her cultivation was not enough, and it was useless to come here. So, she stayed in Descending Star City, and did not come with us. Didi Gu. After saying that, he looked up at Meng Qi. Are you sure? Xue Qingxian said as he turned to look in the direction of the fireworks. He muttered, That's the center of the Starfall Sea. It's even more dangerous there. Why would third sister appear there? Meng Qi frowned slightly. Before she could say anything, Su Zijuan, the disciple of the Falling Star Pavilion, who had been quiet all this while, suddenly pointed to the sky and said excitedly, "I think there was a flash of sword light just now." Just as he finished speaking, another sword light streaked across the sky. Su Zijuan's eyes lit up. "That's a sword from the Falling Star Pavilion." He became even more excited. "It's the Pavilion Master." The Pavilion Master went in that direction. Chapter 113. Mengqi looked in the direction Su Zijuan was pointing, and saw a meteor streaking across the sky. Even in the Starfall Sea, the cold light of the sword qi was dazzling. As expected of the Starfall Sea, did Pavilion Master also see the signal firework just now? Su Zijuan turned to look at Mengqi. He went in that direction. Then now, Qin Xiuma stepped forward. "What's your choice?" He wasn't the one with the highest cultivation in the team, but he was the most decisive. Along the way, everyone seemed to be used to listening to his commands. "Let's go and take a look," Mengqi said decisively. "I'll go too." Chu Tianfeng immediately followed. "Since it's someone Mengqi knows, I think we should go," Li Che also said. "If it's really third Miss Xue who sent the signal for help, we can't just sit back and do nothing. If it's Xue Jinwen, we really have to go," Su Junmo said. "Besides, everyone is going. Naturally, I can't be left out." Most importantly, Mengqi was going. He definitely had to go. "I'll go too," Xing said. "I'll go wherever Mengqi goes." In the end, everyone's eyes were focused on Xue Chengxian. He smiled bitterly. "I can't get out of this Starfall Sea by myself." He paused, cupped his hands to the people around him, and said, "Although I don't know why my sister appeared in this Starfall Sea, I'll have to trouble you all." After Xue Chengxian finished speaking, his gaze swept over Mengqi's face. They did come to save Mengqi, but these people's trust in her was really beyond his expectations. Just because she said that it was his third sister's signal firework, these people didn't even question it. Qin Xiuma and Chu Tianfeng. Even he had heard of these two geniuses among the younger generation. Su Junmo and Xing, who came from the demon realm, were both heaven demon nobles. They were actually loyal to Mengqi. There was also the Surging Waves Academy, a rather famous medical cultivation sect in the southern land. Other than being famous for their medicinal pills, they were also well known for being aloof from worldly affairs. Xue Chengxian looked at Mengqi's side profile thoughtfully. These people's trust in her seemed to be innate and unreasonable. Such a strong cohesiveness. He narrowed his eyes and looked at his hand hanging by his side. Actually, it wasn't that he couldn't understand. After all, that day in the apricot forest, when they saw the poisoned third younger sister, when everyone was still worried about this and that, it was she who rushed forward without hesitation just to save her. That day, even Xue Chengxian himself didn't hesitate to give the blood moon he carried with him to Mengqi. "Then let's go." Qin Xiuma nodded slightly. He glanced at Mengqi and said, "Mengqi, follow me." "Okay." Mengqi nodded. Holding the silver medicine knife in her hand, she stood obediently behind Qin Xiuma. With a soft clang, Qin Xiuma and Su Zijuan's natal longswords appeared together and hung in the air on both sides of the crowd. Mengqi turned to look at Qin Xiuma's natal longsword. He cultivated both sword and technique, so the longsword had a strange and mysterious aura. Qin Xiuma glanced at her and suddenly raised the corner of his mouth. Fourth realm perfection. Amazing. Mengqi praised sincerely. Qin Xiuma was a nascent soul cultivator. Not only did his natal longsword have a sword spirit, but he was also able to cultivate to the fourth realm perfection. He was one of the best among sword cultivators. As if to prove his words, Qin Xiuma pointed his finger lightly. His natal longsword suddenly moved forward, cutting through the night sky as if it directly merged into the night. If Mengqi hadn't been staring in that direction, she almost couldn't find the trace of his longsword. Her heart skipped a beat, and her body suddenly became warm. A ball of flame circled around her, and finally enveloped her completely. The flame gradually became transparent, and vaguely floated beside Mengqi. Meng Qi turned around and saw Chu Tianfeng raise his eyebrows at her. Si Kongxing, who was standing beside him, made a spell with her hand. A black shadow jumped out in front of her, and then disappeared into the ground in front of her. In addition to Si Kongxing's powerful defensive spells, this was also her specialty. The black shadow was actually a water-type spell. It could sink into the ground and secretly investigate the situation. Xue Qingxian and Li Che followed closely behind Si Kongxing and Chu Tianfeng. Su Junmo was behind them. He was about half a meter away from Xue Qingxian and Li Che, so it was inconvenient for him to talk. Meng Qi couldn't help but smile. The talkative fox must be feeling very uncomfortable. His mouth was probably sore from keeping it shut. She retracted her gaze and looked forward. This group of people clearly hadn't known each other for long, but they had a tacit understanding. They should have all fought side by side in the Starfall Sea and cultivated this tacit understanding. One could imagine how many battles they'd experienced before. Meng Qi's gaze narrowed slightly, and her heart felt warm. These people had all come to save her. She flipped her left hand, and several Xian spirit stones were already in her palm. She hadn't practiced her silver medicine knife very well. At most, it was just a decoration. In battle, she probably still had to rely on formations to fend off enemies. Qin Xiaoma glanced at her out of the corner of his eyes. He saw the light of the Ling stones flashing between her fingers. Xian spirit stones? He asked. Meng Qi nodded. Their group quickly walked towards the place where the signal fireworks had gone off. The snow-toothed bees weren't just dangerous to Xiuzha. They were also dangerous to the strange beasts of the Starfall Sea. Meng Qi and the others knew that they hadn't encountered any other strange beasts after passing through the clearing where the snow-toothed bees had attacked them. Meng Qi followed closely behind Qin Xiaoma. She had always been obedient in this regard, so she walked step by step carefully. After passing through the clearing in the hilly area, and then two small mountains that weren't very tall, Meng Qi had just taken a step when Su Zijuan's life-bond sword almost brushed past her cheek with a whoosh. A sharp cry sounded, like a rooster whose neck had been grabbed. A black bug the size of Meng Qi's finger fell to the ground. Xia shooting gap. That black bug had been cut in two by Su Zijuan's sword. When it fell to the ground, its legs were still struggling. It's a golden silk beetle. Meng Qi looked down. She kicked the black bug lightly and flipped it over. On the back of the black bug, there indeed seemed to be thin golden threads mixed in. She took out her natural silk gloves and put them on. She took out a small box and put the golden silk beetle inside. This golden silk beetle can be used as medicine. Meng Qi held the box in her hand and asked Qin Xiaoma, "Who is keeping these things for? We'll divide them after we get out of the Starfall Sea." "Me." Qin Xiaoma glanced at her, took the small box, and threw it into his storage bag. After this small episode, they continued to walk forward. The Starfall Sea is full of spiritual energy. Qin Xiaoma whispered to Meng Qi as they walked. No wonder so many cultivators end up in the Starfall Sea to train. Cultivating here is indeed twice the result with half the effort. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. When I reach the spirit severing stage, I'll enter the Starfall Sea again. Qin Xiaoma continued. It's the best place to practice swordsmanship. Su Zijuan nodded. Pavilion Master also said so. If we want to pursue the great Tao of swordsmanship, we have to enter the Starfall Sea at least once. Meng Qi didn't say anything. The appearance of the golden silk beetle seemed to be a signal that they had left the snowtooth bee's territory. They hadn't walked far when Qin Xiaoma suddenly stopped. Be careful. His gaze was piercingly cold, and he quickly looked around. Now Meng Qi and the others were between 5 or 6 hills, and the place they were in was much smaller than the open space where the snowtooth bees had appeared. Chu Tianfeng and the others also stopped, and their 2 long swords moved quickly in the air. Si Kongxing raised her finger, and a small ball of black water drilled out of the ground and landed firmly in her palm. This is, before she could finish her sentence, more than 10 green lanterns suddenly lit up on the surrounding 5 or 6 hills, as if they had agreed beforehand. Wolves. Si Kongxing's eyes suddenly widened, and she murmured the second word. Meng Qi quickly glanced around. In the night, there were 7 or 8 tall wolf-shaped shadows standing on the hills. They looked down at Meng-Chi and the others, and they seemed to be much taller than them. Those green lanterns were not lights, but the eyes of these giant wolves. The giant wolves' eyes were deep, and they stared coldly at Meng-Chi and the others. Ah! Si Kongxing suddenly exclaimed in a small voice, and quickly moved closer to Meng-Chi and the others. There are more. She raised her hand and pointed at the foot of the hill, drawing a circle. There are wolves in all directions. Sure enough, after a short while 5 or 6 giant wolves with deep green eyes slowly turned out from behind each hill. These wolves were not as tall as the ones standing on the hills, but each of them was almost twice as tall as Meng-Chi. After these giant wolves turned out of the hills, they were not in a hurry to attack, but just surrounded the few of them in the center. Meng-Chi took a deep breath. Qin Xiaoma and Su Zijuan's long swords suddenly stopped, and hung above everyone's heads, the tips of their swords pointing in 2 directions. Chu Tianfeng raised his hand, and a circle of blue flames ignited, protecting the 8 of them in the center. Meng-Chi and the others gathered together, standing back to back in the flames. She calmly looked at those giant wolves. They were far taller than the wolves of the 3,000 worlds, and their green eyes were cold. In the night, they looked exceptionally terrifying. Including the alpha wolf at the top of the hill, Su Junmo quickly said, "There are a total of 43 wolves." He glanced around. The 7 alpha wolves are all 5th grade beasts, and there are 3rd grade and 4th grade beasts below. Yes. Qin Xiaoma nodded. Meng-Chi's gaze was solemn. In other words, they were now surrounded by 7 Funshan cultivators, and a group of Jindan and Yuanying cultivators. Beasts of the same level in the 3,000 worlds were no match for cultivators. A Yuanying 4th or 5th stage sword Xiao or Dharma Xiao could easily deal with a 5th grade beast. But this was the Starfall Sea. On the top of the hill, the 7 alpha wolves of the giant wolves did not move. At the foot of the hill, those giant wolves just stood in place, their green eyes staring straight at Meng-Chi and the others. The night suddenly became quiet, and only the sound of the wind blowing through the canyon could be heard. The night wind brought with it the smell of the giant wolves. The smell of blood was very strong, and it was unknown if they had just gone through a battle. Meng-Chi's heart moved slightly, and something in her storage bag suddenly vibrated crazily. Her right hand, which was holding the medicine knife, carefully and slowly pressed on the storage bag. Inside, a black token was jumping desperately, as if it had sensed something. This was the token of the patriarch of the Ji family that Ji Wujiang gave her earlier. That's right, Ji Wujiang. She suddenly remembered that before she entered the sky observation mirror, she saw Ji Wujiang also in the Starfall Sea. At that time, there seemed to be several giant wolves besieging him. Although it was not easy for him to deal with them, those giant wolves obviously could not hurt him. At this moment, at the place where the signal firework had risen, another signal firework rose with a whoosh and suddenly exploded in the night sky. The spiritual aura light formed a clear, one character, and soon dissipated in the night sky. Do it! Qin Xiaoma waved his hand. His natal longsword was like a long arrow released from a bow, whistling as it rushed toward a giant wolf standing upright on one of the hills. During this period of time, Su Zijuan had cooperated with him, and they had already developed a tacit understanding. As soon as Qin Xiaoma moved, he also moved. His natal longsword turned into a stream of light, shooting toward the giant wolf on the other hill. Under the night sky, the 2 longswords were as fast as lightning, and in the blink of an eye, they slashed through 2 giant wolves. Awoo! The 2 giant wolves that were attacked suddenly howled wildly. They crouched down, raised their giant claws, and slapped heavily at the 2 longswords that were shining with cold light. This seemed to be a signal to attack, and the giant wolves at the foot of the hill also raised their heads and howled, then quickly rushed toward Meng-Chi and the others. Si Kongxing shouted, and a black giant wave suddenly emerged from the ground, adding a barrier to Chu Tianfeng's flames, firmly protecting them. Su Junmo opened his hand, and an azure net fell from the sky, covering the sky and covering the earth, pouncing toward the giant wolves. Only this time, the azure net was dotted with cold light, and there were countless small daggers. Awoo! The two giant wolves at the front were caught off guard and were immediately enveloped by Su Junmo's azure net. Countless sharp blades pierced into their bodies, and the two wolves immediately screamed again and again. On the hill, the wolves howled again, and the giant wolves at the foot of the hill suddenly stopped, glaring at their companions in front of them who were covered by the azure net. Qin Xiuma's reaction was extremely fast. He opened his hand, and the sword that was originally fighting with the wolves at the top of the hill suddenly flew back. The sword passed through the azure net, and the two giant wolves that were covered in it screamed, and their heads suddenly fell to the ground, making a loud bang sound. The air was suddenly filled with the stench of blood. Amazing! Si Kongxing was not stingy with her praise. Although they did not kill the alpha wolf, it was still a victory. Qin Xiuma's face did not show any joy, and his gaze became more and more serious, looking up at the 7 alpha wolves at the top of the hill. These giant wolves at the foot of the hill obeyed orders, and not a single one rushed out to save their companions. They were cold-blooded, ruthless, and terrifyingly obedient. They didn't look like ordinary beasts anymore. Instead, they looked more like an organized sect of cultivators. If the snowtooth bees had such a command and organization, they probably would not have been able to last until Mengqi appeared. Qin Xiuma's expression was serious, and he looked at the distant top of the hill, at the giant wolf that was fighting with his longsword. The other party had already stopped, and its green eyes looked down at them coldly. It was clearly just a strange beast, but the light in its eyes revealed some coldness and disdain, as if it already had human feelings. Si Kongxing probably also felt that these giant wolves were a little strange. She opened her mouth and suddenly said, "I remembered a legend." Everyone was paying attention to the movements of the giant wolves at the top of the hill, or at the foot of the hill, and only Mengqi responded. Previously Si Kongxing swallowed with some difficulty and spoke quickly. When I asked my father to investigate the Sea of Falling Stars, he told me that if there were sky demons in the demon realm who made mistakes, they would not be killed, but they could not be allowed to continue to stay in the demon realm, and sometimes they would be punished into the Sea of Falling Stars. Mengqi turned to look at Si Kongxing. These giant wolves are very similar to the snow wolves of our sky demon clan in the demon realm. Su Junmo continued and said, "Yes." Si Kongxing nodded. Before the sky demons who make mistakes are punished into the Sea of Falling Stars, they will be punished by the demon lord, and will never be able to regain their human form, and can only maintain their beast form. Their realm can no longer be improved, and they will always be in whatever realm they enter the Sea of Falling Stars. Su Junmo nodded. These are called sinful demons, although they can't transform into human form, but, There were a total of 7 snow wolves on the 6 hills around them. Only 2 snow wolves were on one of the hills. Before Su Junmo could finish, one of them suddenly said, "There are also sky demons." The 8 of them all looked at the giant snow wolf, and Mengqi realized that this snow wolf only had one green eye. They were a little far apart, and it was night time, so she could not see the other eye clearly, and thought that it was probably blind. Su Junmo and Si Kongxing meant that these were sky demon snow wolves? Although they could no longer transform into human form, they could still talk. Heh, the snow wolf sneered. So it's a little white fox and a little red fox. My lord, Si Kongxing called sweetly. In the demon realm, age was not important, and the strong were respected. That snow wolf's cultivation had reached realm 5. So Si Kongxing was right to call him that. She pursed her lips and continued. We came to save our friends, and we don't mean to offend you, my lord. Could you let us pass, my lord? Sure, the snow wolf answered lazily. Thank you, my lord. Si Kongxing beamed with joy. She did not expect this snow wolf to be so easy to talk to. It's just that. The snow wolf raised its front paw. Its huge front paw drew a circle around Mengqi and the others, and finally stepped on the ground again. Leave this female golden core cultivator, and you can all leave, he said coldly. Don't even think about it. Qin Xiuma and Chu Tianfeng took a step forward. Human cultivators? The snow wolf coldly glanced at the 2 of them with one eye. Merely nascent soul human cultivators, heh. Although he was in wolf form, the sarcasm in his words could not be more obvious. Even his green eyes seemed to be dyed with a touch of ridicule. Ignorant child who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you think your long sword can stop me? Your grandpa wolf just doesn't want to bother with you. Otherwise your long sword wouldn't be able to block my attack. My lord. Xing took another step forward. This female golden core cultivator is also our good friend. Could you let her leave with us? If my lord has any orders, we'll definitely do our best to fulfill them. Little Red Fox. That snow wolf lazily glanced at her. Grandpa Wolf is willing to let you pass because of your father. Otherwise, you and this little white fox together wouldn't be able to withstand one of Grandpa Wolf's claws. Cut the crap. Chu Tianfeng's gaze was cold. He raised his hand, and his natal magic treasure floated beside his face. The black-clothed youth fearlessly raised his head and looked directly at the snow wolf. If I kill you, we'll be able to pass. Just as he finished speaking, the red lotus had already floated into the sky. Petals fell one after another like rain, falling around the snow wolves at the foot of the mountain. As soon as Chu Tianfeng attacked, Qin Xiaoma and Su Zijuan simultaneously attacked with their swords. This was the Starfall Sea. They didn't believe a single word of this heavenly demon snow wolf. In this place, one wrong step could cause even mighty figures who were more powerful than them to directly fall here. Xing also closed his mouth. He raised his hand, and a huge black wave rose up, protecting Meng Qi within it. Xue Chengxian flicked his hand, and a shiny silver medicine knife appeared in his hand. His figure flashed, and he blocked in front of Meng Qi. His gaze was solemn as he looked at the snow wolves at the foot of the mountain. Li Chei's palm faced up, and his natal cauldron lightly fell into his palm. Medical cultivators not only knew how to save people, but their understanding of poisons was also the best in the 3,000 worlds. He flicked his finger, and 7 or 8 medicinal herbs fell into his natal cauldron. In just a moment, green gas rose from the cauldron, and a strange rotten smell floated out. Over the past few days, they had developed quite a tacit understanding of each other. In just a short moment, everyone was ready for battle. They were only waiting for Chu Tianfeng's red lotus to explode, and then all of their attacks would be launched towards those snow wolves. Hee hee. On the top of the mountain, the snow wolf suddenly chuckled. His laughter was contemptuous and full of disdain. He looked down at them condescendingly, grinned, and revealed his white teeth. He said in a cold tone, "How dare you make a fool of yourself in front of your grandpa wolf with such insignificant skills?" Meng Qi. Xing stepped forward and said to him, "Be careful." After he finished speaking, he looked at Meng Qi strangely. Since the snow wolf began to speak, Meng Qi had been looking up at him. Now that everyone was ready for battle, she was the only one who was still staring at the snow wolf in a daze, as if she was crazy. Meng Qi. Xing quickly pulled her arm. "Are you okay?" Her question attracted everyone's attention. Qin Xiaoma and Chu Tianfeng quickly turned their heads and glanced at her. Meng Qi. Chu Tianfeng asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" He, Qin Xiaoma, and Meng Qi had come all the way here from Qingfeng Valley, and they had fought side by side more than once or twice. No matter what Meng Qi's cultivation level was, he was never the kind of person who would drag the whole team down. Meng Qi. Xing suddenly became even more worried. "Are you okay? The little girl has clearly fallen for Grandpa Wolf's charm and wants to stay." The snow wolf chuckled. "Can you leave now?" Xing. "Kill him first." Chu Tianfeng jumped up anxiously. With a boom, the red lotus flames that blotted out the sky and earth exploded, and even the night sky seemed to be illuminated. One could see the anxiety in the master of the red lotus. The flames exploded among the wolves. Without an order, the snow wolves did not dare to move. They could only howl and desperately avoid the burning red lotus flames. On the top of the mountain, the snow wolf who had spoken earlier suddenly howled. No one saw how he moved, but in the blink of an eye, he appeared among the snow wolves at the foot of the mountain. His huge front paw slammed down, and the red lotus flames that were burning wildly just now were extinguished by more than half in an instant. Grandpa Wolf said, "It's just a small trick." As he spoke, he rushed toward Chu Tianfeng and the others. The snow wolf rushed to Chu Tianfeng's flame barrier in a flash. He did not immediately break through the flame barrier, but the huge snow wolf's movements were incomparably agile. Si Kongxing and the others looked at him as he quickly circled around the crowd. Qin Xiaoma and Su Zijuan's long swords chased closely behind him, but they were always a distance away and could not hurt him. Su Junmo put his right index and middle fingers together and pointed at the snow wolf from afar. 7 or 8 green nets suddenly appeared around him, and it looked like they were about to envelop him. Ha 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 ha. The snow wolf suddenly howled, and 7 or 8 spirit stones flew out of his huge paw. With a loud boom, the light around them shot up into the sky, and spirit chi spewed out. Not to mention Chu Tianfeng's flame barrier. Even Si Kongxing's huge black waves were scattered by the spirit chi and disappeared in an instant. This is... Su Junmo and Si Kongxing's expressions both changed. This was a spell formation. The two of them looked up at the snow wolf. The Snow Wolf clan was a heavenly demon aristocrat, but they definitely did not know how to use a spell formation. And it was such a powerful spell formation. Mengqi. Si Kongxing did not care about anything else. She reached out and hugged Mengqi's waist, and quickly retreated with her in her arms. At this moment, not only her but even Su Junmo, Chu Tianfeng, and the others noticed that something was wrong with Mengqi. Everyone was fighting so fiercely, but she was still standing in the same place, and did not react at all. This was really abnormal. Little girl Scarlet Fox. The snow wolf howled and rushed forward. Put her down. Don't even think about it. Si Kongxing's small face flushed red. She was originally taller than Mengqi, so she simply bent down and hugged Mengqi's knees with her other hand, and lifted her up. Si Kongxing quickly retreated with Mengqi in her arms. Su Junmo and Xue Qingxian flashed in front of her. Idiot! Idiot! The snow wolf was furious and scolded. You're so stupid. He only had one eye left, and his gaze fell on Xue Qingxian's face. The successor of the Xue family is so stupid that she can't tell what she's going through without taking her pulse? The snow wolf's gaze swept across Li Che. There's a medical cultivator here? It's true that two idiots together can't become a little smarter. They can only be more stupid. Li Che, Xue Qingxian. Little girl Scarlet Fox. The snow wolf said. Why are you retreating? If you retreat any faster, Grandpa Wolf will. As if to prove his words, the snow wolf's huge body suddenly flashed. By the time everyone reacted, he was already standing beside Si Kongxing. Can you be faster than your Grandpa Wolf? My lord. Si Kongxing hugged Mengqi tightly. Please let go of Mengqi. She's so good. Idiot. The snow wolf snorted softly. He raised his huge front paw and pressed it toward Si Kongxing. Stop. Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xiaoma shouted sternly. The red lotus sword rushed toward the snow wolf in an instant. The two of them also pounced on the snow wolf. Humph. The snow wolf snorted softly. He raised his front paw and slapped Qin Xiaoma's sword with great accuracy. The long sword trembled. Although it was not swatted down, it began to sway as if it was drunk. Idiot. Ji Wujiong. Before the snow wolf finished speaking, Mengqi's voice suddenly sounded softly, interrupting him. She paused and said, What's wrong with your left eye? She asked. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.